Hi, everybody, and welcome to another Into the Terminal. Today, we're going to be talking about 5 security things that you should know about. Why don't we jump into the terminal and we'll start with our first security-related command.
Yeah, let's do that. Here we go.
All right, so our first security-related command, we actually had a discussion right before the show on whether it was or wasn't security-related. I use a ton when I do cyber competitions. Specifically, it's called strings. And what it does is you run it against a compiled binary, and it pulls out the strings that are left in the compiled binary. So if we were just to take a look at this command, right, it's just like weird binary junk, but you can see that there's actually some text in there too, like this lib64 ld reference, right? That's probably an include, would be my guess, in the source code. And then when the compiler compiled it, it left this bare word out because it's a reference to a file that has to be go and retrieved by the binary application.
Yeah. So generally instructions get compiled into bitcode, but bare text strings just stay as text, which is what strings is all about.
Right. And so arguments passed to system calls or functions are often left as text in the compiled code. But where this is really useful from a cyber competition perspective is a lot of times there will be a task of what IP address does this application send data to? And the one way that you could solve for that is you could run the application, which is super dodgy, and then use tools like Wireshark to capture the packet data and then identify that application's packet data to then figure out what IP address it's corresponding to.
So you're suggesting I shouldn't just run the suspicious program?
Yeah, right. I would recommend against running suspicious programs. But because connecting to a remote host, you have to pass the IP address of the remote host you're trying to connect to. That is often kept as a bare string inside of the compiled application. And so I use strings a lot for answering those questions because I can just run strings. You can see here's all the words that are in the compiled binary, right? And you can, some of it's kind of goopy, but if you get further, right, you get to see some stuff that's
INET. Right. Yeah, these are like things you'll see in the output of this particular command. So yeah.
And so I just look for the thing that's an IP address, and then I put that in as my answer. And more likely than not, that's the correct answer. And it's a really short way of retrieving that data to then submit in the cyber competition.
Right.
So strings, take all the stuff that's left as bare text in your compiled binary and just show it to me without all the binary goop with it.
Yep.
And then you can.
Now, I guess it's worth mentioning this isn't foolproof, right? This data can be obfuscated, right? If someone who wrote the application really does not want you to find out where it's connecting to, they could do things to, I don't know, they can have logic in the program that would encode and then decode that string. And then you'd instead see a string that's a bunch of garbage that looks encoded in some way. So not always foolproof, but most people don't go to that length.
Right. Well, because they have to edit that code later. So if they're storing it as hex, then they have to figure out what hex thing they need to put in if they need to update it later. Just for convenience, that's usually not how people will write their application because they have to maintain that application over time, just like any other software developer.
Personally, I like to make code that's as difficult to read as possible so that later I can't change it. That's why I started with Perl.
That explains so much about how you work, Nate. All right. So that was a super short critical path today, right? One command, you could try it. It's really easy to run. You can pipe into grep if you want to look for specific content in that compiled binary. So don't forget to mash that like and subscribe. Nate, what else are we going to cover today?
We have totally 5 commands to cover and not more than 5, but we're going to cover, just 5. So if you think there's more than 5, you're miscounting. It's not our fault. We're going to talk about SS, so you can look at connections on your machine. We're going to talk a little bit about OpenSCAP, nmap for scanning and whatnot. We're going to talk about firewalls. We're going to talk about some troubleshooting tools. That's still 5, all just 5. Strings you just covered, and our good old friend sudo, some SELinux stuff. Yeah, Wireshark, Hey, 5,
Shark?
totally 5 things.
Yep,
5
5
things.
things.
5
So
things.
stay with us after the transition as we talk about only 5 things. We've already covered 1, so only 4 things.
4 more things.
Really? Yeah. All right. So we started the episode planning with like, let's get 5 things that we think are interesting security related commands people should know about.
Yeah.
May have overachieved, but
I mean, if you're not going to do something well, why do it at all, right?
exactly. So Nate, what's our next command that we need to pay attention to?
All right. So somewhat security, somewhat troubleshooting related. You're going to notice a lot of like double themes here with some of these commands, but sometimes you just want to know what's listening on your machine. And this is security related because one, how are you going to identify what ports you need to have open or closed? How you want to maybe notice if there's something listening that shouldn't be, right? That sort of thing. So there's a command, used to be netstat, now it's SS. I forget what SS stands for. You probably know.
Socket status.
Socket status. There we go. But what SS will do is it gives you a number of ways of showing what's listening on your system. And it's not just TCP, right? You can also look for like Unix sockets and whatnot. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples here. We're just going to run SS all by itself. And you notice it gives us a ton of output. It's not really filtered. It doesn't necessarily give us all the information that we want, but it's a start, right? But if you really want all the data, you can do an SS-A, and that will literally give you all the data. And when I was prepping for the episode, I ran these through word count just to see how much more data, and it's roughly 3 times the data. All your data times 3. So, right. So if you're just absolutely not sure what you're looking for, just remember -A exists. Throw a -A on there, and it'll show you everything that is listening on your system. However, I'm going to give you a couple examples that are a little more common because a lot of these are full screen outputs. Let's change our format there on the screen. Okay, so LN. Okay, now what this does is it looks for TCP and UDP connections, shows me what's listening, because that's normally what I care about. And the -N outputs numeric instead of like service names and sometimes DNS names. That used to actually look up DNS names. It seems like SS doesn't do that. Sometimes that would really slow down the output, which was really annoying. So the -N has become habit for me. But see how in the example I've got here from the -A, it's got these names in here that it pulled out of Etsy services. When I do it with the -N, it shows me the port numbers instead of the names. So for me, that's actually more readable. For you, I don't know. It's up to you. But if I did this same command without the -N, you'd see it'll give me service names or names from Etsy services. If I do it with the -N, it gives me port numbers. Port numbers give me a thing I can actually work with, which is why I like that better. So you can see we've got 22 listening. We've got, I don't know what the heck 323 is, but that's listening. We've got 9090, that's of course Web Console, and these upper end ports, the 15, 779, and 778s. So that brings up a good question. What is 323? Why is that listening? Right? Well, we can ask it. We can ask SS to tell us what process is listening on that port by adding a -P. And of course, the output's a little bit uglier, but we can find 323 here. And we'll see, oh, it's Crony. Crony's listening on 323. I'm not really sure why. Maybe there's a thing I want to firewall later, but we're going to talk about firewalls in a future section here. So there we go. You got any favorite SS commands there, Scott?
Like you, I like tulp, or tulp-n
Right.
is the numeric version, just because it
Right.
gives me all the stuffs.
Cool. All right. So there you go, SS. And I have another demo coming right up. So actually, this one's not even a demo because I didn't cook up a demo, but the next command is OpenSCAP. So here, we'll just go to some discussion mode for OpenSCAP. Hold on. I got to turn off this thing. I got too many buttons to click here, Scott. So OpenSCAP, we've covered OpenSCAP in the past. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to ask about that, Nate. Like, haven't we done whole episodes on OpenSCAP?
We have. We did 2 full episodes on OpenSCAP, and the actual command, if you're keeping track, is OSCAP, right? And it comes from the SCAP security guide, and I think SCAP tools. SCAP security guide installs everything you need to go with it. But it lets you apply security policies to a system, or scan for and then apply, I should say. And that's exactly what we covered in these other 2 episodes. So in the notes, we're going to include links to those episodes. So if you want to go watch them, But basically, if you need to adhere to certain compliance policies, it's exactly what OpenSCAP is there for. Things like DISA-STIG, the CIS benchmarks. We've talked about these, PCI DSS, right? There's policies in place. There's policies existing in that SCAP security guide for all of those. And you can scan your system and see how compliant you are. And then you can even have it go and remediate a good number of those things that would have tagged you or would have failed you in the past, right? So just keep that in mind. OpenSCAP's good stuff. Our good friend Jay Scar helped us out on those episodes. So good stuff.
I know you guys covered DISA-STIG, which is interesting for public sector folks.
Mm-hmm.
And you guys also covered CIS benchmark.
Yep.
CIS benchmark is the Center for Internet Security benchmark. There's a couple different options, but if you're just getting into like, how do I make sure my machines are on a good security footing? That's a really good one to start off with.
Yeah.
There's also the Australian Essential 8, and ANSI is the French government regulatory one. That's also pretty good from these are basic good security policies that you want to follow. So any of those, even if you're not in like a public sector space, any of those are excellent first blush. I would like to make sure my machines are in a good security footing standards to try and comply with.
Yeah, I mean, security, just like a baseline security, is good for anybody, right? You don't have to be a government agency to care about security. So maybe you don't want to apply DISA-STIG to your web server, but applying something like CIS level 1 or level 2, probably a good starting point. All right, so that's what, 3 out of our 5 list,
out of 5,
right?
Yeah.
Top 5.
This is also, I'd like to point out the time where if you're a live viewer, ask those questions in the chat. If you're a third viewer, please leave comments down below and we will read and respond to them, though sometimes as the Red Hat Enterprise Linux user instead of as our individual handles. But yeah, Nate, what's command number 4?
All right, so commands number 4 and number 5, 5A, they kind of go together. So I'm going to give you 2 demos in one. So let me get my share back on here. All right, so my particular lab environment has 2 machines, so I'm going to be switching back and forth between the 2 of them, but I'll try to call that out as I'm doing it so things don't get confusing here. The first thing I want to talk about is nmap, and every time I say the word nmap on stream, somebody pops into the chat and says, oh my God, warn people about nmap. If you work in an environment where anybody is watching, anybody at all, if you have network security people or InfoSec people, make sure they know. Make sure you have permission to do things like nmap on your network. However, nmap is a really useful tool for things like security baselining, right? So if you just deployed some firewall rules, or if you're trying to get a baseline of systems and you want to make sure that the things you think are true are actually true, nmap is a great way to get that done. So it's included in a package that's just called nmap. It's included with RHEL. And we're going to install it. I didn't install it beforehand because I wanted to show you what the package name was and stuff. We have touched nmap in the past, so not exactly new territory here. But there we go. It's installed. You notice it installed a dependency called nmap-ncat. We're going to talk about that one in another one as well, but ignore that for now.
Well,
so
real quick, before you actually go into the technical details of running nmap.
Yeah.
Why? Because of its behavior, would someone need to know about you using this tool?
Because it does port probes and port scans, right? And that's generally seen as bad, right? It's generally seen as the precursor to an attack. And I just realized I told you I have 2 machines and I forgot I installed this on the wrong one. So while we're talking.
What's going to happen is we're going to run nmap against another machine. And the scanning machine run that's actually running nmap will kick off thousands of connections to our target machine to try and probe whether things are open or not open. And that's why you want to make sure that 1, you have permission to use this tool, and 2, you notify people that maybe like your networking team or your security team that you're about to use this tool, because otherwise they will get this like big alert on their monitoring software that says like machine under attack, thousands connection received. And in a lot of environments, this is not a permissible tool to use. So you really want to make sure you have permission first. There are a couple ways that you could maybe avoid this. Like if your target machine was your own machine, so if you like nmapped your local host, that goes through the localhost interface and would never hit the network. Or if you nmapped your own IP address on one of your own interfaces, that's going to not leave your machine for the scan.
Right.
So but it's when you're running it on external machines, like that looks really scary to network security people.
Right. So nmap by default, I forget what the upper boundary is, but it scans the first X number of ports. You can tell it to scan higher, but it is several thousand. You can see that in my default scan here, I just did a quick nmap RHEL, and that nmaps my RHEL server that's in my lab environment here. And you see it only got one port that's open, but that's port 9090, right? I think it goes up to like 10,000 on the base scan. So if you want to scan higher than 10,000, you have to tell it that. But that's actually a good point. If there's a specific port you're looking for, you can do an nmap dash, I think it's lowercase p, and then 9090, and it'll scan just that port. Or let's pick a port that's not open. Right, and it tells me, it doesn't say that it couldn't connect. Like, it doesn't say that, like, the output that it gives me here is filtered, which tells me that there's probably a firewall at the other end that told it, no, we don't accept connections for 1, 2, 3, 4. And that is true, because that's the next tool I was going to show you. Now we're going to go back and forth between nmap and firewall-cmd, which is the thing that we use to interface with firewall-d, which is the sort of API that's in place that talks to netfilter, which is the thing that runs in RHEL that actually does the firewall filtering inside of it. It's your host-based firewall, right? So we're going to do a firewall-cmd, what is it, -list all. What this is going to tell me is just like a basic summary of what firewall-d is configured to do at the moment. And you can see that services that are open are cockpit, which is port, oh, what did I just do? Oh, wow, I can do like a, Scott, did you know you could do that? I just made a...
Do that.
Let me see if I can put that back, because that's going to be hard to read. Oh no, what have I done?
Oh, drag the other one too. Yeah.
There we go. Okay. Now they're on the wrong sides. I just totally messed everything up here. Let's put this back over there. There, now we've got server and client back where they belong. Don't click and drag the tabs. It gets confusing. Okay, so where was I? That services that are open. So we can open up another service pretty easily. Now, firewall-d has a whole host of more extended options that we can deal with here. Things like zones, which are actually really helpful if you're in an environment where you want some systems to be able to connect or some IP ranges to be able to connect to a service, but others not. I'm not going to get into that today because I could spend the whole episode talking about firewall-d. We're going to just add the service HTTP. Okay. Now there's HTTP, there's also HTTPS, right? And these are definitions that are stored inside of Etsy. There's an XML file in there that has all these services defined. You can make your own if you want to. Again, not going that deep today. But now that we've added HTTP, and if you remember, in my SS output, right there was port 80, that's HTTP, right? But in my scan earlier, we didn't see HTTP because it wasn't open. We're just going to do another nmap on RHEL, and now we should get port 80 open as well. There we go. Now we have 80 open as well. So you can see that it's pretty easy to open a port. If I were to remove that, of course, then that would remove the port. But you can also, remember I added it by service name. If we want to do add port as well. Now, if you do it by port, you have to specify what protocol you're doing as well, right? So we're going to open SSH kind of manually by using port 22. And this is where that SS output with the numeric output is helpful, because if you don't know what port the service you're looking for runs on, and you're not doing it in a numerical way, it's going to give you the name for it if your system knows what the name for it is. It would have said just SSH instead of 22, right? So... all right, so we do add port 22. If I do another nmap over here.
And Nate, I would like to point out that I actually prefer adding services, because some services actually require multiple ports. And
oh, absolutely.
the service definition includes all the ports one would need for that service. Whereas if you do it by
Right.
port numbers, you have to add all the rules
Yep.
for all individual ports you might need.
Yeah, the reason I use that as an example, normally I wouldn't add SSH manually like that. I would just tell it to open the service SSH, but I didn't have another service to test with. So I did it manually that way. If there's a service that's not defined inside of the rules that already exist, then you're going to have to put them in manually or make a rule, right? But you're absolutely right. You could have a rule that says open web that does both 80 and 443. You could have a service like mail that depends on several ports, right? And you could say open up mail and it would open up all of them, right? So that's definitely something to think about. Okay, this kind of leads into my next tool. Do we have any questions or anything about firewalling or nmapping?
No, not yet. But this is command number 5 again.
Yes, command number 5. We're going to go to command 5 next. Let me clear the screen again. Okay, so you ready for this?
I'm ready.
Telnet. Telnet is my next tool.
Oh,
People hate
waiting,
Telnet.
waiting for the rage in chat.
Let's look. Just watch chat for about 2 minutes until the stream catches up. There's going to be rage, I guarantee it. It's not just Telnet, though. It's also NC or netcat, which is the package I was talking about earlier that got installed along with nmap. Both of these tools will do the same thing. I argue Telnet is a safer tool because netcat has a whole bunch of implications along with it, and I'm going to talk about those as we go. But first of all, why is Telnet a security tool? And I don't think I installed it yet, so let's do a...
Well, I mean, everyone knows Telnet is insecure, which is exactly what Chad is about to tell us.
Yes.
But
so Telnet is absolutely insecure. And I'm talking about the Telnet client, not the server. You absolutely should not try to run a Telnet server on your RHEL box because, come on, like, what is this, 1998? By the way, we used to manage Linux systems over Telnet, and it was always a bad idea, but we didn't have anything better at the time. Anyway, so is an unencrypted, unsecure protocol. So obviously, bad stuff. You shouldn't be using this to manage machines. You shouldn't be using this to transmit, I would argue, anything other than maybe some troubleshooting or diagnostic stuff, which is exactly what I use Telnet for. So what do I use it for? I use it to see if ports are open. Right, so you can nmap and see if a port's open, but is the service actually responding on that port? We can try to telnet to many ports. Now, if the port expects encryption, then telnet's not exactly useful to do anything more than can I connect to the port? So if I were to telnet to RHEL on port 22, like OpenSSH responds, but I really can't do anything here. If I try to do any command at all, it's going to be like, what are you talking about? And just drop me, which is exactly what it did.
right.
If I go to like the web port, then I'm not really familiar with what commands I have to issue to a web server. But if I do something like, what's that? Get, I think is perhaps one.
Yep.
Okay, so I actually get HTML output, which tells me I'm talking to a web server. It also tells me like, look, hey, it's identifying itself as Apache. It told me it's a bad request, right? So this tells me some diagnostic information like, hey, cool, I connected to what appears to be Apache. It seems to be responding like I would expect Apache to respond. So now I can move on with troubleshooting. Now, the reason I also mentioned netcat, and the reason I think netcat is sometimes a more dangerous tool, netcat can do similar things. So NC, and it's included with the package -ncat, right? So this is like part of the nmap tool set. But if we do NC space and then very similar output, let's go to RHEL on port 80. A very similar input, I should say. It should do the same thing. Why do I feel like it didn't connect? No, it did connect. Okay, it just didn't give me output. And there we go, right? So I hit enter and it told me bad request. So very similar to what I got with Telnet. The thing that scares me about netcat is if you put this on a server in order to test connections between servers, like, I don't know, say that this is your database server to your web server or vice versa, right? I guess you wouldn't connect that way. You'd go from the web server to the database server. If you put netcat on the machine and forget to remove it, right? You can do really horrible things with netcat. I can use netcat to open up a port, right? So if I do, let's see here, let's control C out of this. If I did, and I didn't cook up an example for this, so maybe this is going to end up really bad, but if I do a nc-l, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I redirect the output to a file, what that just did is it opened up port 1, 2, 3, 4 on this machine, and it redirects the output to whatever I redirected it to. So now if I were to telnet, I don't know if I can telnet this direction. I can't telnet from this because I didn't install it. See what I mean by not cooking up a demo? If I connected to that port and issued a command, it would write the command to that file, which might sound innocuous enough. It's actually a good way to move really big blobs of data across a network if you don't have an easier way to transfer files. But you could also do things like redirect that output to bash, which would mean you'd have a remote shell. And that's a bad thing, right? So I don't like even putting netcat on a server, even for troubleshooting, right? Which is why I still like telnet better. Because telnet, the client, while yes, there are some implications to having it there, it's not nearly as dangerous as netcat. And I see that the chat has gone through with a whole bunch of other suggestions on other ways to test ports. So great. Thank you.
And I just wanted to point out that when Nate connected via telnet to the SSH port, and if you could just like do that again, Nate.
Sure.
The connection is made and a little bit of data is passed, and then it's waiting for the key exchange and like other SSH-y things, which never come. Or if Nate puts in the wrong data, it just disconnects. But the important thing here is notice it says SSH 2.0, OpenSSH 8.7. This is the same type of data that security scanners will often collect. And so when you get a notification from your risk management team or InfoSec team or whatever that's like, oh, you need to be running OpenSSH 8.9, that's how they know that you're running SSH 8.7, right? Because they connected this header information and that's what they used. Now, the reality is for these machines, which are Red Hat Enterprise Linux, we've taken whatever critical and important security vulnerabilities that may be present in 8.7 and we closed them. So we're still running 8.7, but it's a mitigated version of 8.7, which is not denoted in this string. And so their security scanner doesn't know about it. And so oftentimes you have to go back to that person and be like, wow, Red Hat backports fixes. And so, yes, I'm still running OpenSSH 8.7, but that's okay because Red Hat backports the fixes. So no, I don't need to upgrade to OpenSSH newer version because this version is fine. And they may have additional documentation to kind of back that up. But this is how that data is being generated that then gets presented to you later of like, oh, you're running this version or that version and you need to change. And here's where they're getting it.
Exactly. Most services will identify themselves. Apache did the same thing, if you recall, from when I did that test with Apache as well. It told me I'm Apache 2462, right, on RHEL, and it even what version of OpenSSL it's running, right? So that's exactly what those scanners are grabbing. All right. Other than the telnet hate, anything else?
You're surprisingly not a lot of it this time.
Wow. I guess they're getting used to my lack of hate for telnet.
So Nate, the fifth command we want to talk about was sudo.
Yes. So in order to avoid an episode 62 incident, I've actually prepared a demo for this. So, and folks who have done our troubleshooting challenges might recognize this because that's exactly where I grabbed it from. So if you're trying to do one of our troubleshooting challenges that has to do with sudo, watch this episode and you'll get the answer. So what we're going to do is we're going to create, so if you're not familiar with what sudo is or sudo, people pronounce it different ways. It is a way to run a command as a different user, most commonly used for using a non-privileged user and running commands as root. Now, that's obviously not the only way that you might use sudo. You could use it, you know, if a tool or script runs as a different user and you need to use sudo to run as that user to run the script, you can also use it for that. But most commonly, it's just to give people administrative level access to do certain things that they have to do to be able to get their job done, or do all the things. If you're like the systems administrator, you might give all sudo access to somebody. The example I'm going to give you here is just say you have like a web developer who needs to be able to restart Apache. right? So we're gonna define some commands that say you can manage Apache using systemctl, and we're gonna apply it to a group of users, and then we're gonna make a user and put them in that group and show you that they can actually do the things, right? So in etc, there's a folder called sudoers.d, and these are where you would drop in rules for sudo. You can see there's one already in here because of the lab environment that we use. We're not going to touch that one. But as long as Google lets me copy and paste out of this Google Doc without throwing weird commands in here, we're just going to make a file called webteam, and we're going to paste this in here. And it looks, I think, like it came through clean.
You could always use cat-vet to make sure.
Yeah, totally could. Totally could. No, I'm looking for things like Google Docs, and this is like inside baseball, folks, but Google Docs replaces some characters with other characters that look prettier, right? Like double dashes. It always like condenses them into a long dash. And a terminal's like, what the hell is that thing?
Another one where it uses like a other directional symbol.
Yeah. So we usually have to be careful when we're making these rules, but it looks like this is coming through clean. Now, there is a quick way to test this, and I think you could probably use this tool to edit that file in the first place. But if you open up a tool called vi-sudo, what this will do is it'll open up the usual etc sudoers file. And then obviously we're not making changes to the sudoers file. You just quit back out of it. And what it does is one of the things that vi-sudo does, which is helpful, is it does a sanity check on your configuration when you exit it, right? So if you put something in there that was totally wrong, it'll come back and say, yeah, there's something wrong. And it also checks those drop-in files. And I think, let's just use the up arrow. I think you can edit those. Yeah, so if we do, yeah, so we can edit that file directly. Opens it up in your favorite editor. It's not always Vi. It'll be whatever your terminal is set to the default editor, I think. So anyway, I tell you that only because it does that sanity check. It'll double check and say, do the rules that you just put in there look sane? Because if you borked your sudoers file, then sudo, I'm pretty sure, just kind of unanimously doesn't work properly after that, unless you go back and fix the thing that you did wrong, right? So just keep that in mind. All right, so what I did there, in fact, we didn't really go through this. I made a command alias called web services, and it has a whole list of commands that you're allowed to run, or I should say a group of commands that are in web services. Now you can tell a rule that your rule is allowed to run these or not allowed to run these. So you could make it an exclusive, exclusive instead of inclusive. I usually do inclusive rules, but I could imagine a case where there's certain things you absolutely don't want people to run. You could make a command set for that and say you cannot run this. You can make that exclusive. So anyway, then we make a rule here that says %web, which says the web group is allowed to run on all hosts, and it's allowed to use the web services command group without a password, right? So that's essentially what we're doing here. And you can see why I pre-cooked this. It actually took me a few attempts to make sure the the format of this was right, because you have to get all the syntax right, and some of it doesn't make sense. Like, why is the word all in there twice? Well, one of them is hosts and one of them's users. Why isn't just all hosts and all users? I don't know, but that's the way sudo is made. All right, so we're going to close that back out. Then we're going to make a user. Right? We're going to give Nate a user. We're going to add, and we're going to make a group called web. And then we're going to put Nate in that group. Oh. All right, so we're saying group mems, the group we're working with is web. We're going to add Nate. Now, if I did an ID on Nate, I think this will work, right? Yeah. Now it tells us Nate is in the web group, right? So now if I do I switch over to Nate, I do ID here, it tells me, yep, you're in the web group. Now, some cool things about sudo, if you don't know what sudo commands you can run, if you do a sudo-l, it'll list them for you. And here it tells me the user Nate may run the following commands on this host. And it tells me without a password, I can run all those things that I put in my command alias. So now if I did a sudo systemctl, I don't know, stop httpd, it should allow me to do that. But notice that these things are exclusive to httpd. If I try to then stop, I don't know, sshd, it's going to tell me, give me your password, because I didn't tell it, because it's not included in the things I'm allowed to do without a password. Now, this user actually doesn't have a password, so I don't know if it's not going to actually give me a good demo here. But if I put in the proper password for it, then what it would do is it would say, no, 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 you're not allowed to do that. You can't run that command, right? So that's how that'll look. So there we go. Totally working sudo example. Scott, what do you think?
I think that's great. See, Nate is actually poking fun at me because early on into the terminal, Eric and I tried to do a sudo episode, and it was like a disaster because we were putting together last minute. We didn't test things. Syntax is very finicky with sudo, and man, it was just like a half hour.
If you skip back a couple minutes to when I introduced sudo, you'll know what episode you should go watch if you want to see it. So.
Oh, yeah. Good times.
So there you go. Sudo. Scott, what's the 5th command?
Oh, well, I mean, we can't talk about security commands without talking about our friend SELinux.
Oh,
now,
right.
I'm not going to go into a ton about SELinux today because, again, like sudo, we have whole episodes dedicated to SELinux. By the way, some new distributions are starting to use SELinux. So
I heard
a Red Hat flavored distribution thing anymore. But SELinux is awesome. And if we jump into the terminal, the most simplistic SELinux command, sestatus, right? Am I running SELinux or not? And if I am running it, what mode is it running in? And what policy is it using? So I like sestatus. It's the SELinux status. This machine is running enabled, meaning that it is actually using the policy. If you look down in the middle of the output, it says current mode. Let me highlight that right there. So I'm not only using Linux, but it's actually an enforcing mode. The other way that you could run it is permissive mode, where the rules are checked but not enforced. So you get like logging and other stuff if things are violating the SELinux policy. Enforcing, it's checking the policy, but also enforcing the rule set. So if something is denied by the policy, it's actually denied on this machine. The other kind of interesting thing for basic stuff is this, the policy name. So by default, Red Hat Enterprise Linux machines, I think Fedora as well, they use the targeted policy. So specific daemons and processes are targeted by SELinux. There are other policies that you can use, but targeted is the default because it chooses specific actions to go against or to try and protect you and your services from. And it's pretty widely applicable. We've used this for decade plus, actually more like 15 or 20 years now. So it's really well used and worn in, and we know all the bits.
Yeah.
So
I got to be honest, I don't even know what SELinux would look like in a policy other than targeted. I've never used one.
It is far less nice.
Yeah.
If you do something like an MLS policy where you're actually using user-based policies where this user can open this file, but not that file, regardless of what the permissions might be, things get really scary really fast, which is why we keep targeted as the default.
Sounds good to me. I'm going to stick with targeted unless I ever find myself in a reason that I won't have to, or that I shouldn't.
So SE status, if you're new to SELinux, that'll tell you what the status is. A lot of people I just turned it off. Don't just turn it off. But if you're having a problem and you're worried about it being SELinux, you can use SE status to see whether it's on or off, right? Or
the muscle memory command I have for this is getenforce, which gives you a lot less data, but it does give you whether it's enforcing or not, right? Enforcing, permissive, or disabled. It'll just output that. It'll just give you the, right, there you go. I used to use this in a command prompt script. So our prompts were intelligent. This is when we were still working on moving from the let's just turn SELinux off to the let's turn SELinux on phase, right? we had an intelligent prompt that would say, I forget if it would change color, or we had a flag in the prompt that would say whether SELinux was on or not. mainly because it changed the way you troubleshoot problems, right? If SELinux was off, you didn't even have to think about certain troubleshooting steps when things were getting weird. But if it was on, obviously there's another layer of stuff you need to check into if things aren't working correctly. And it took us a while to get used to that.
So, real basic SELinux. If you want more on SELinux, we actually have 2 or 3 episodes that go into tedious detail on working with it, but I don't want to burn us out here. So, the 5th command that we're going to talk about is managing ping. So,
yeah, I guess there's less of a command and more of a configuration.
Yeah.
Someone doesn't know how to follow directions, Scott. I don't know who that is.
So earlier, Nate was using nmap, right, to map out one's ports. Well, it turns out by default, nmap, when it is given a host, will first ping that host to see if it's available. And if it's not available, it will just say, oh, host appears down, and not actually do any further work.
Yep.
So turning off ping responses is a way that you can kind of start to reduce some of these automated attacks that you might be getting if your machine is connected to the internet. It is not a security mechanism by any way, right? Whether your machine responds or doesn't respond to ping traffic doesn't customize what services are there or the version of the services you're running or whether the services are exploitable or not by different things, right? This is only to try and shape some of the behavior of some of the tools that people use for identifying at-risk machines. So I've got a couple boxes here, and I can ping my other box, right? It's responding to pings very nicely. And so if I was to use nmap, it would then ping it. It gets a response. So then it goes and does the port mapping against that box. But on my machine over here, this one, I could actually change a couple of settings to disable that, right? So if I look at proc.sys net IPv4 ICMP echo ignore all, instead of ls, I'm going to use cat. So this is a kernel setting that's in actual memory of my kernel right now. Meaning if I make a change to this, it will be immediately effective on the machine, but it's only persistent in memory. So there's 2 pieces of it. One is I can change the setting, but then I also have to persist the setting. So right now it's set to 0. I am not ignoring pings or really ICMP traffic.
Right.
So if I toggle this, and then I move back to my other machine, I'm just going to recall the same command from history. But now, notice I'm not getting any responses.
No more responses.
Setting, and the machine that I'm trying to send pings to, which is ICMP formatted traffic, it's now ignoring all of that ICMP formatted traffic. Right. So when I control C it says, hey, I sent 18 pings and I got no responses. So this machine does not appear to be operational.
That's it, man. You're secure. Done.
No, not secure. I just changed the behavior of the machine. If I toggle it back to 0, so I am now responding to pings, right? There we go. So I'm once again responding to those ICMP messages. All right, so let me turn it off. That's changing the setting in memory, and it's immediately effective. But the other thing I need to do is I need to go into etc sysctl D, and we can come in here and say net IPv4 ICMP echo ignore all equal 1.
And that'll apply that via sysctl at boot time, or if you do a sysctl, what is it, -a? -a that reapplies it. One of them does.
I don't remember what the sysctl command it is to refresh or to reapply all the sysctls. Yeah. You can also add this to a tuned configuration file because it adjusts sysctls. So there are a couple different ways that you can make it permanent. But you want to make it persistent so that if you reboot the machine, it doesn't undo the change you just did in memory because it's got a fresh kernel boot with fresh settings on it, right? You want to reapply these changes to your booted system. But That's IPv4. If I look at the IP addresses on this machine,
Oh man, IPv6. Everyone forgets IPv6.
everybody forgets IPv6, right? So there's
Which is a good reason to bring it up, by the way. All of the examples I used in firewall-d were IPv4 too.
So there's another ICMP setting for IPv6 as well. So if I take a cap on proc sys net, man, if I could type IPv6, and this one is in the ICMP subdirectory, echo ignore all, right? So currently this machine is responding to IPv6 interface ICMP traffic, which includes pings, trace routes, and like a variety of other types of traffic. So I would want to go and do the same procedure that I just did in my IPv4 setting to my IPv6 setting as well, and persist it in either syscontrol.conf or one of the syscontrol files or in a tuned. So every time I boot the machine, it's remapped to ignore these ICMP requests. Now, this does have a hazard, right? If you're trying to troubleshoot networking, most of the time, people's first attempt at troubleshooting networking problems is, can you ping a host? Well, guess what? You just turn off pings. So you'll have to adjust or account for that in some of your troubleshooting behavior.
So what I've seen done in a lot of larger scale networks is they will disable ICMP at the edge firewall or edge router so that people from the outside can't reach in with ICMP, right? Which is primarily where your attackers are going to be coming from. But inside the network, you can still ICMP across the internal network. So things like your monitoring tools, your troubleshooting, they still work, right? So that's an option.
Yeah. So as long as you're aware of it and you make changes to either how you're going to configure it, where you're going to configure it, or how you're doing your troubleshooting and management, all good. But it'll use some of the things like all the automated scripty tools that try to connect to a machine and do nmaps and then try to connect to the ports. They all start with verifying whether the host is up or down. Yeah. And how do they do that? By sending a ping.
Right. Think about it. It's from an efficiency standpoint, right? If you have a range of 65,000 IP addresses and you don't know which ones actually have hosts that are listening and which ones are, if you do the ping first and it responds, then the next thing you do is try to do the actual port scan. Because if you try to port scan a host that physically isn't there, then your port scans all take time. Each port that it tries to reach takes maybe a couple milliseconds, maybe a couple seconds, depending on how you have timeouts configured, right? So if you're scanning 65,000 IP addresses and you're not pinging first, then your scan takes a whole lot longer because it's trying to scan machines that physically aren't there, right? So that's why the ping is important to do first. But if you have ping turned off, then these scanning tools may think your host isn't there and not even bother to continue, not even bother trying to scan. Now, it's not foolproof. You can tell nmap, don't bother to ping, and it'll try to scan anyway. So, a lot of folks will, if they see enough things that are not responding to ping, they'll just turn off the ICMP check, and then you're going to get scanned anyway.
Right. And that's the other thing is, depending on who it is that's performing the scan, they may or may not know that they can disable that, or they may or may not want to spend the extra time to let all the service connections time out. So just because you've disabled pings isn't going to protect you, right? There's no additional protection. What it's doing is for those lower value people that are trying to scan your system, it will cause them to pass you by because they didn't bother to spend the time to actually try to scan other than, or making that toggle if you responded to ping or not. So again, no additional security. It's reducing volume more than anything.
Right.
So Nate, should we get into last and fifth command that we're going to cover today?
The fifth and final command.
All right. So the last command that we're going to talk about is Wireshark. Now, Wireshark has a really slick graphical utility. So if you're running in a graphical workstation or maybe server with GUI, I don't know.
Server with GUI.
Wireshark. And there's all kinds of like toggles and buttons, and it's actually a pretty slick tool. But Nate, did you know that there's a terminal-based version of Wireshark?
No, Scott, I totally didn't.
Yes, I did. It's called tshark, right? So let me go ahead and make myself an extra screen here, and we're going to tshark. I'm going to tell it that I'm interested in capturing data on my ETH0 interface. And actually, I could just do that. And here it is. And I'm watching all the traffic come through live, right? But the interesting thing about Wireshark is actually not seeing it live per se, but being able to run analysis after the fact. But running tshark on the terminal, you need to save that data, right? Seeing it on your screen doesn't really help you a whole lot. But if you write that data to some file, so now it's capturing that data, and you can see the number of packets it's capturing, incrementing them. And when I do things like SSH to another host, oops, how about 10.0.5.238? Oops, I put that backwards. 10.5.0.238.
Yay.
Yeah, so now I'm connecting to that box, and that was captured in that packet capture that I did.
Right.
So let me go back to my other thing, and when you hit Control-C, it stops capturing the packets. And if I run tshark and I tell it to read my file, I actually captured one of these earlier, so I'm going to use that instead. There we go. Right, there's all the packets it captured. But now that I have them stored in a file, I can do the extra analysis that Wireshark lets me do, which is, I think, where it's an interesting tool.
Yeah.
One of the most beneficial tools that I've found, or like subtools within Wireshark that I've found, is being able to reconstruct the data that was actually passed as part of these connections. So like it's all, you can see the packets that were passed, but what was actually in those packets? And not only what was in the packets, but like, was it interesting or useful?
Right.
So one of the things you could do for TCP formatted packets, because they're based off of TCP sessions, which is a whole collection of data that is transferred between the two hosts for a specific connection, you can actually have Wireshark list what all the available TCP sessions are. So I'm going to grab my, well, maybe I won't.
I once watched a presentation on reassembling an entire VoIP conversation that is a voice over IP telephone conversation via Wireshark. They were able to capture the entire conversation and replay it, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah. All right. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying go into my log file that I captured earlier, look for TCP connections, that log file. I'm interested in the fields out of the packets that match TCP type. And specifically, I'm interested in the TCP stream number for all of those connections, right? And so it went through and like, here's all of the packets, and that number that's being displayed is the TCP session ID of each of the individual packets that was captured in that like 400 packet capture that I did. But that's a lot of data. And so what I'm really going to do is I'm going to take that list and pipe it to sort. I'm going to unique it, and I'm going to have it sorted by number, right? So there were 24 unique TCP sessions in that packet capture file that I got earlier.
There you go.
So then I can go about and say, hey, tshark, can you please reassemble these individual sessions and show me what was in there? So I'm going to grab one of them. All right, so I'm going to grab, let's say, session 10. All right, so here what I'm doing is I'm saying, hey, Wireshark, I am trying to read out of this capture file that I made earlier. I want to follow the TCP stream, meaning I'm going to give you a stream number 10, and I want you to reassemble the TCP transaction that happened for stream number 10. So include all the packets. And what I'm looking for is the ASCII payload data for that stream of packets. All right, so this is a HTTP connection, but it looks like maybe it was a HTTPS connection.
Right.
So it was, And that's why all that stuff there at the top of the screen is goopy, is because that's the encapsulated in secure socket layer encrypted traffic that was transmitted between these two hosts. So that's not super helpful. And it's also, by the way, why we like using encrypted connections. It's not super useful.
Right.
But I did make another connection where it was port 80, right? Port 80 is the web port. It does not use SSL encryption. And so if I recall the same command, but I say, hey, rebuild for me session number 21. So here's session number 21. Session 21 is a HTTP GET request, and it went out to this host, and it responded back with 342 bytes of data, and it gives me a header for the HTML content that I'm getting back, or HTTP content I'm getting back. And then down at the bottom, there's the actual HTML that was transferred in this
Super
series
businessy.
connections, right? And so if I curled this machine, right, that was the web page that was transferred to me. And you can see in the tlog capture, there's the exact web page that was transferred to me.
You've also got the syntax at the top that I could have typed in telnet to get the HTTP response I was looking for.
Yes, indeed. But if this was like a login page where I provided login credentials, guess what? That would have been in plain text across the HTTP connection, and I would have captured that in this data too. So any images could have been transferred, and there it would look in my ASCII output as like goopy.
Yeah, it could be reassembled.
Yeah, you can reassemble it, and then you can grab that segment and actually send it to an image viewer and see what image was transferred. Like, you get the whole transaction that was transferred.
Somebody could snoop on your cat pictures.
Well, yes. But this is why we love secure socket layer based connections, and we want to use things like encrypted technologies like SSH instead of telnet, because we don't want someone to be able to capture our packets and then data that was transmitted to them. This is also why we don't do things like non-SSL based authentication, because someone will capture your username and your password that you are sending over non-encrypted web traffic.
Not good stuff. Not good stuff. Now, one caveat, which I've been kind of holding in the back of my brain since you did the first example, if you're on a system that gets a ton of traffic and you don't have a lot of filters applied to that packet capture, it will accumulate data very quickly. Could even produce a noticeable strain on the system, right? So just keep that in mind. If you're on like your production web server and you're trying to do some troubleshooting, be careful how long you run packet captures for and what you're capturing, because it could get big quickly.
And I think that's the real concern, is like the size of the file that you're creating, that you're saving into. You realize you're doing a whole bunch of disk IO now to save the packets onto, and that's where the like strain comes from. The strain is not like capturing the actual networking data. That's passing through your machine anyway. Your kernel and everybody look at it anyway. It's more the like taking it out of the network stack and saving it to a file that is the extra process here with tshark. So just I think that may be it that I wanted to show, but was there no, or let me also do a tshark -r. So I showed this earlier. This is like all the packets that were captured. So you get their packet ID, you get information about like the two hosts that were part of that connection, what type of connection it was, and some data about the connection that was made with this one packet. So you can go even to like individual packets. What I did with the stream ID is I took an individual packet and said, hey, this is part of a larger series of connections made with this piece of protocol. Isolate all the packets associated with this connection and then reassemble what happened there. So that's where the stream ID stuff came into play. But so Nate, that's it.
5. It's a multiple of 5. We're good.
Buddy, and welcome to another Into the Terminal. Today, we're going to be talking about 5 security technologies you should be using now. So yeah, maybe maybe 6. Um, so a lot of these, or actually all of them, come with Red Hat Enterprise Linux, but some of them you may not have seen before. So Nate, why don't you start us into the terminal, and we will actually take a look at our first one, which is session recording.
Yes. So I know we said into the terminal, but I'm going to configure this using Web Console, just to be honest, because it's really easy to show and really easy to demo. You can do this without Web Console, and we'll show you what the config file looks like in a minute. But basically, within the Web Console, there's a plugin you can install. I think it's just called Session Recording, and it'll look kind of like this. And you can see I've got no sessions. I've also got no configuration in place. If I click this little gear button up here, this is the configuration that I can set for session recording. Now, all I'm going to do in here is enable it. The way you enable it is under the SSSD config right here, which depending on the size of your screen will either show up over here where I've got it or down at the bottom. So just keep that in mind. I'm going to switch this to all. And you'll notice that I can exclude users or groups. So if there is for some reason that you do not want to record a certain group of users or a certain set of users sessions, you can do that here. I'm not going to do that because in most cases, I'm going to say you're probably going to record everybody. Otherwise, kind of what's the point? Like having an out seems like a bad idea to me. I'm sure there's reasons. Maybe you don't want to record root, for example. I don't know. Okay, so now that it's on, let me switch back over here. Look at that, fluid. It's like we've done this before. So now I'm actually at the console on the system that I just turned the session recording on. Let me find my commands here. So what I wanted to show you was the actual configuration that we just put in place. So there's a configuration file that I'm just going to copy out of my notes, paste in here. It's called etc sssd conf.d sssd session recording.conf. And this pretty much shows you exactly what we just told Web Console to put in place. And this is telling me that session recording scope is all, exclude users none, exclude groups none, right? Exactly what we just saw within Web Console. There's another config file that lets you configure the session recording parameters, not who to record, but how to record, right? So that is this file. And the file, since you probably didn't see because I hit enter too quick, is etc tlog-rec-session.conf, right? Now, the reason I wanted to open this up in an editor, not just cat it, is because all those other config options that you saw in Web Console lets you configure this file. But if I do it through Web Console, it puts it into like a really munged, like not easy to read configuration. So I wanted to show you the config before you changed it with Web Console, because it has all these nice comments and stuff in here. And all I'm going to do is change this line here. It's line number 12. It tells it to include a notice when a session is being recorded. Now, maybe you want to include a notice, maybe you don't. This is why it's configurable. I think for legal reasons, maybe you are supposed to include a recording, but I don't know. Maybe that depends on your industry and what you're doing. But we're just going to save that. And really, just that quick, it'll take effect, right? So the next time a session starts, SSSD will call tlog and it will record the session, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to start a session. We're going to use SSH just because, you know, that's kind of a common way that you're going to be connecting to systems. RHEL at localhost. Now, obviously, most people don't SSH to localhost, but bear with me. This is a demo. I'm going to put in our password, and you can see right there, look, attention, your session is being recorded. Now I'm going to clear the screen, and then we're going to do something totally not nasty like cat etc password, right? Or maybe I'm going to try to cat etc shadow. Oh no, the hacker has been thwarted. Okay, now I'm going to log back out again. Okay, now you might say, big deal, you didn't actually stop that guy from doing anything. But what we have now is a recorded session. So what I'm going to do is go back here. We're going to go to, hold on, switch tabs. I'm going to go back to session recording on my web console. You see it doesn't show anything. That's just because I need to refresh the page so that it shows sessions. And that's really only because I already had the tab open. If I went to the tab fresh, it would show me the sessions. And now right here, you can see I've got a session, right? If I hit the play button here, it's going to show me that session and what happened on that session. Now I realize this is probably hard to read on stream, but I just want to give you the concept of what this looks like. So you look at that right there. I'm catting a file, right? Now, obviously, not everybody's going to have Web Console installed. And like I said, it'll be easier to read if I do this over here. If we switch back to my terminal, the sessions are recorded via, they're in the systemd journal. I'm going to show you that quick. We paste this in here, journal ctl-o verbose. We're going to grep for the term recording, or rec, right? And you can see right here, it's got recordings done, right? Now, the recordings, you can actually, if you really wanted to, look at the output and the commands right here in the system journal. But that's not exactly pretty. Here you can see, look, I ran cat on Etsy Shadow and it told me permission denied, right? But again, not pretty. So what you can do is you can take that recording ID, right? And you can put that in through a thing called tlog-play. Now I have a concocted nasty regular expression here that I didn't come up with, but it's in our lab. If you want to go do our tlog lab, this is directly from that lab. I'm not even going to attempt to tell you what all this is doing, except that it is in fact getting the same recording. It's cutting out some characters. It's getting exactly the piece that we need. And we're going to hit enter. And it's putting it all through tlog-play. And you see, it brought me to a shell, right? Well, it's not a shell. This is a recording of the shell. You can see, remember I cleared the screen at the beginning? It just cleared the screen. Now it's catting Etsy password, which succeeded. Now it's going to cat Etsy shadow. Nope. No, you can't do that. And then it's going to exit. And then, of course, it exits the tlog-play. Now, this is really useful in environments where you need to know what users are doing, right? Maybe you just want it for, who broke the system at 2 in the morning. Well, look for sessions that happened at 2 in the morning and see what happens. Maybe you want it to be able to tell who is trying to do something naughty on your system. Maybe you just want it for accountability. Maybe you need it for compliance reasons, right? But that's exactly what this is here for. And there we go. That's the demo on tlog.
So a couple things. One, Nate, what software did you install to get this ability?
Sure. Let me go back to my notes. I'll give you the exact package names. So the Web Console plugin is called cockpit-session-recording. And then the packages that make tlog work are just called tlog.
Yeah, and if you install the Web Console package, it'll pull in the tlog ones as dependencies. The other thing is this is stored, you mentioned in the journal. That's actually a change. Previous releases of RHEL, I think, stored that in, no, they always stored it in journal, but you can store it in rsyslog as well. And then they're stored as logs. So you can also, if you have your rsyslog set up, you can send it to a remote logging server so that you don't have to worry about somebody manipulating things on the local machine. You actually have it stored remotely as well. And you can also do playback on that remote machine because it's stored in its logs. So you can use tlog against the log files that have been collected from various systems to look at what's going on. The last thing I'd like to point out, which is really handy, is you get to see not only the history of commands that get run through your recorded session, but you get to see the output and error messages displayed on the session to the user. So a lot of our other mechanisms, like looking at somebody's history, we don't have all that additional context of what they saw on the screen when they ran those commands. But with tlog and session recording, you do get that additional context. So Nate mentioned looking at what was happening at a certain point where your machine was having problems. We've all had that experience where a user says, I ran the command, but it didn't work. And you're like, well, what was the error? It is difficult to obtain from the user who may not know what is important in the error. But with session recording, you just see exactly what they saw.
Right.
So
This way you're not parsing logs to try to figure out what happened. You can literally see what the session did. You can see exactly what the user saw, which is actually really, really handy.
Right.
Folks who watched last week's show should be very proud of me. I got the right video this time.
Yeah. And Nate's doing all the producering today. So thank you, Nate. So we're here to talk about
totally important stuff, right? And like anyone who's worked for more than a minute in an operations role, hopefully we're not talking to folks who are unaware of this, but security is important. It's really important. And you've probably had arguments with security people or with end users or both about where the right level of security is, right?
Yeah, and the technologies that we're covering today, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, are all included in RHEL. In fact, a lot of them are even enabled by default, but you may not have run into them because they just kind of work. Or maybe you did run into them, but you didn't understand what was happening. So
And
that's why we cover them a little bit more today.
many of them that are not enabled by default could easily be enabled by those OpenSCAP policies we talked about in previous episodes. So if you're curious about those, go back and look at them. You'll see a lot of references to a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about in this show.
So now is the time where if you're a live viewer, you can ask questions in the chat. If you're a deferred viewer, please feel free to leave us a comment. Nate and I do monitor and respond to comments as well. So let's
Happy.
look at the next topic, which is system-wide crypto policy. All right. So real quick, you'll notice what's my prompt there, Nate?
Whoa, are you on a RHEL 10 beta machine?
I am, because I live on the edge.
Live on the edge, man.
Red Hat Enterprise Linux 10, it's coming mid 2025. Beta is already released, but I figured it would be a nice way to live on the edge a little bit here at Into the Terminal and talk about some of these topics that are also included in RHEL 8 and are also included in RHEL 9 and are also going to be included in RHEL 10 as we see them here in the beta. All right. One of the things that we started shipping in Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8 is a technology called system-wide cryptographic policy, or crypto policies for short. And we can take a look at which one we're running by default. All right, so update crypto policies -show. That shows you the named crypto policy that you're running. And there's one called default, which is, guess what? The default. So
What?
on your Red Hat Enterprise, I know it's crazy. Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8, 9, and 10 beta, if you just take a look at this, you'll be running the default. The idea behind crypto policies is that there's a whole bunch of cryptographic libraries that are used by various different applications, right? We just saw Nate use SSH. Well, that uses cryptography libraries. The web browser uses SSL. That's cryptography libraries. You might use something like Kerberos, which has some cryptography stuff built into it. You might be using other TLS encapsulated services, right, which is more transport layer security, which uses different cryptography libraries. And we learned the hard way a while back that when one of these has a problem, it can be really bad. I'm thinking specifically about Heartbleed. So you may remember Heartbleed was a bunch of web servers out there in the world had older cryptography ciphers enabled by default, and they were no longer considered secure. And yet the web server was configured to offer those cryptography ciphers for people connecting. And so you could connect and be like, hey, I want a SSL 1.0 connection. And the web server would be like, look at its configuration, be like, oh yeah, that's cool. Here, let's do that. Even though that was not a really secure cryptography cipher to use anymore. So back then, what we did was we ran around and we started looking at all the configuration files for all the different services and had to figure out which ciphers were and weren't allowed and customize our service configs to decide which should and shouldn't be allowed. And that's actually what was the spark for system-wide crypto policies. Wouldn't it be cool if we could have a central place to decide what ciphers were and weren't allowed for all the applications running on our machine?
Listen, Scott, you can't make systems administration too easy, because then anybody will be able to do it.
Yeah, well, that's never a problem. So we collected that together and we actually compile all the applications that come with Red Hat Enterprise Linux against this library, so that when SSH is doing SSH encryption stuff, it actually does it by checking against the crypto policy to figure out what the cipher being used by SSH is permitted or not. And if it is permitted, then everything happens as one would expect. But if it's not permitted because it's too weak, then SSH is told no, and then SSH does something with that no. And so a couple of weeks ago, we did a show on SSH and we talked about public-private key authentication. And I mentioned at that time something very obscure like, oh, if you're using a key that you've pulled from a really old machine, it may not work anymore on newer versions of RHEL, but I didn't really tell you why that was the case. And it turns out crypto policy is why that's the case. So if you try to authenticate with an old, weak key cipher, the SSH daemon will try to grab that cipher library, and crypto policy will actually tell SSH no, and then SSH goes back and tells the user no. And that's how it all kind of works. But what happens if you want to enable those older, less secure ciphers? So we can change the system-wide crypto policy to permit that behavior. So we could do it.
The answer is don't.
Well, yes, however.
No, the answer is don't. This is your security personnel talking. Don't.
Yeah.
No, realistically, we get it, right? There's cases. There's backwards compatibility to think about. There's reasons you may have to do this.
Right. And this actually happened when we first rolled this out. Firefox is another one that uses crypto policies by default. And it turns out that you would connect to like different web servers. And if that web server was offering a less secure cryptography algorithm, Firefox would be told no, and the user would actually not be able to connect to the web server that they're trying to transfer data from. And within Red Hat, we have this service that was really old that we used for different things, which has now been updated, thankfully. But a whole bunch of people were refused connections to it when they started using RHEL 8 machines. And it's because their Firefox was refusing to make those old TLS connections to that machine. And so we had to like set their policy to legacy, and then it would permit those older ciphers to be used. All right, so when you change the crypto policy, you'll want to reboot the machine because the applications that get started up, they need to have fresh copies of these libraries. And so like if I did something now, like I started Firefox fresh, it would actually use the legacy policy. But anything that's already running, you would want to restart to also use the legacy policy rules. So that's why we recommend a reboot whenever this happens.
No, in cases like, oh, my web server, right? It's probably good that just switching the crypto policy doesn't go like, oh no, your web server's out of compliance and just kill it, right? That would be a bad thing. But if you were to start Apache right now, it'll use whatever you've set it to. So yes.
Right. So whenever you set it, the recommendation is to reboot. So legacy will enable older ciphers that are deemed less secure. It is more permissive than the default policy. And then we have the opposite. We actually have one called future, which is more stringent. And future, it can have some weirdness. Like generally today, if you make SSL certificates, they're going to be 2048-bit ciphers used for those SSL certificates. But future policy requires them to be 3072 bits. So moving to future could like very easily break some of your SSL configuration because that's not kind of the default for today, right? It's for what we think will be the default in the future.
But if all your keys 8K, you'll be fine.
If you want to check yourself against what we think is the future of these, you could set it to future and see where things are coming off the rails, and then you know what to change over time to get there. All right. So I said I changed it, but let's also just verify that I changed it with the show, right? So that's set. And that's how you manipulate crypto policies. I'm going to set mine back to default because I like default. All right. And because I didn't actually change anything, I set it to legacy, then I set back to default. I don't have to reboot because I didn't change the settings. There's more crypto policy stuff too. Like you could say, well, I like default, but I have all these SSL certs that are 2048-bit ciphers, and I need to keep them. So, or I should say future. These older ciphers that I need to keep. And so you can actually go in and change individual configurations for what ciphers are permitted and what strengths are permitted through additional configuration files with the crypto policy. We're not going to get into that today, but in the show notes after the show, I will make sure to put a link to the Red Hat documentation that actually walks through doing this step by step, if that's what you're interested in.
I think we've got a lab too on that, on modifying crypto policies. I thought I saw that while I was researching for today's show.
That is actually true. So we have two labs. One is called Configuring Crypto Policy, which walks through this. It actually sets to future. You break your web server and then you create new SSL certs, and then you fix your web server by actually upgrading its technology.
Which is the right way.
Yeah. And then there's one called Customizing Your Crypto Policy, and that's actually doing lower level customization, choosing what ciphers are permitted and what strengths are required. So Nate.
Yeah. Next on the list is SELinux, and we already kind of mentioned that we weren't going to go too deep on SELinux. We do have, I think it was episode, what was it, 102? I had it in the notes here somewhere. Yes, episode 102. We went kind of deep on SELinux. Maybe not deep, but we did cover like a whole episode of SELinux. So if you want to go back and watch that, I don't know. We didn't really have a demo prepared for SELinux other than showing its status. Do we want to do that?
Yeah. So, I mean, SELinux, we always talk about having SELinux on and enforcing, and you can check that status with SE status, right? It's right up there at the top. SELinux status enabled. I like SE status. Nate and I were debating before the show start. Nate, what's your go-to tool?
I like getenforce only because typing it and saying it at the same time, because it just gives you a literal like enforcing or not, right? Enforcing permissive or disabled. Less to parse through if you're just trying to find it quickly. However, SE status obviously gives you that, but gives you more, right? So I guess it's really just a matter of preference. We had actually made a dynamic shell prompt at one point that had some bash scripting in it that would use getenforce. And if it was set to enforcing, it would actually put a note in the bash prompt that says SELinux is enforcing on this machine. It just had like an E or a P or whatever based on what it was set to. So that's mainly why I'm so familiar with getenforce, because I used that a lot to make that shell script work. But it was kind of fun, right? Because someone on your web team logs into one of their web boxes. They're like, is this one of our newer machines that has it enforcing, or is it on one of the older permissive machines? It's right there in the prompt. It was really handy. During that transition time, obviously our goal was to get away from having them permissive, right? So, but that was part of the like growing pains. Is it on or not?
And I think that's the first hurdle to get over, right? Making sure that it's turned on.
Right.
The other thing is you could see in the SE status, so enabled or disabled is there. We also have the current mode, which is enforcing or permissive. And then the other thing I like out of it is it gives me the policy name. So this isn't really important for most people because they use the defaults. Right. And the default is one called the targeted policy, where we target specific types of applications. Like containers have some SELinux wrapping. Apache stuff has SELinux wrapping. Other network services like NFS or Bind have SELinux wrapping. But if you're in a more secure environment that actually uses customized SELinux policy enforcement, this is how you can tell like what name of policy you're using. So what's configured on the machine. And then also there's a version. So as you start to make changes to your policy, you can see what version is running on this machine as well. So that's why I like the SE status, because it gives me that more detail, and I'm a super nerd about SELinux. All right. So if you are interested in SELinux, watch the episode, like way more in depth. In fact, we've covered it a couple times on the show. So there's lots of SELinux content if you're not already familiar.
We'll try to make sure there's a link to that show in the notes for today's episode.
Yep. So our next thing that we're going to cover is AIDE. So this is the Advanced Intrusion Detection Environment. And to get it installed here, I just did a DNF install AIDE, which installed the AIDE RPM from the distribution. And then what I did was I did this command called AIDE-init. And so what AIDE does is it creates a database of a whole bunch of metadata about the files on your machine. Because typically if someone unauthorized accesses your machine, they want to do things like change settings to permit themselves more access to the machine, or they might drop a rootkit or other tools on your machine so that they can use them later. So what AIDE does is it creates this database of what your machine looks like today. And when I did the AIDE-init, that's what created that initial database. And right now I'm not using it. So I'm going to go over to var lib aid. Right, and you see that ADB new GZ, that's the initial database that I created. And so what I want to do is I want to transition that one to be what AIDE actually is configured to use. So I'm going to move ADB new GZ to aid.db.gz. All right, so I just rename it because in the configuration file for AIDE, and I'll show that a little bit later, it says when you're doing things like checks, this is the database name to check. And so it's called aid.db.gz. All right, so I'm going to do something on the system. How about I install some software? So I'm just going to install a web server. Well, now that I've installed some additional software, I've dropped files around in my directory structure and maybe updated configurations like the etc password file now has a new user in it for the Apache daemon. So I've gone around, I've changed a whole bunch of stuff. And I can do a aid -- check. And what it's going to do is look at my current state of machine and compare that with that database that I put into place earlier. And then it's going to produce a report of the differences between the initial database that I have stored and my file system as it exists now. And it's going to take a little while for this to run, but it'll produce the report and publish it to the terminal here. So Nate, have you ever used AIDE before?
I'm aware of AIDE. I've used tools like AIDE. I've never used AIDE in production. There was another one called OSSEC that I used, OSSEC, which was another host intrusion detection system. It kind of had some of the features of AIDE, some of the features of the next tool we're going to look at, and wrapped into one, right? It also had like an action, like a blocking mechanism that it would watch logs and block things. It was a really neat tool, but a lot of that is built into RHEL now. You don't need a third-party tool.
Yeah. All right, so my report actually exceeds the scroll back, but what we're looking at are like all the files that have been added or directories that have been added to the machine. So AIDE produces this list comparing what we have now with what's in the database. And then it goes through and actually gives you a little bit more information. So not only were these files added or these directory added, it'll also tell you about things that have changed. So we can see that like etc crypto policy backends, OpenSSL cnf.config was changed. And these
Yeah.
files, things that are in the like MCI, capital H or I or whatever, that's actually telling you the metadata that we track about that file or directory. What exactly has changed? So period means nothing. This metadata thing that we track has not changed. The other things like MD5 checksum, content, I don't remember what I is, hash, that stuff has changed. So we got our list of new things that we didn't see before. We're now getting our list of things that have changed. And then it goes a little bit further and gives you more details about those changes that have happened to the machine. All right. So when you are using AIDE, the idea is that you kind of like have your machine set up in a steady state. And then you build your AIDE database because you're like, this is what I want it to look like now. And when I come back and I do checks, I want to see how it's changed over time.
Right.
So I just installed the software. I purposefully installed the software. I expected all those changes because I installed the software. So I'm going to update my database to say, this is the new state of the machine that I expect, right? So I'm going to do an AIDE -- update. All right, so this will take a little bit of time. And it's basically going through and building a replacement database of the current state of the system. And it's going to put that in the varlib AIDE directory where it stores the databases. And we'll
Now,
take a second.
I presume that you can, because there's things on your system that will be changing depending on the use of the system, right? Not most systems are not 100% change free, right? In fact, I'd argue that no system is change free because logs, for example, are writing all the time. So, or if it's a web server where new content might be uploaded frequently, right? Or a database, right, where the database files are changing. So there must be some way to make exceptions for don't bother tracking this file that we know will change.
Indeed. And in fact, when we talk about the config file at the very end of this block, I
Oh,
will show you how that's configured.
see, now
All
I'm
right,
the one predicting the future.
that's
It's almost
right.
like I have the notes in front of me. I could have looked.
What we just built with that AIDE update was an AIDE new GZ. All right, so that's the new database. And if I'm happy with this one and I want to make it the now snapshot, the now accepted snapshot on my machine, I'm going to move AIDE new to be called AIDE GZ. All right, so I'm going to overwrite the old one because now this is the new accepted state of the machine. Right. All right. But so now I get everything to my accepted state. I build my AIDE database, and now things should be pretty steady. I'm not expecting anything. So I'm just going to let it be. And then somebody's going to come in and maybe do some stuff like, I don't know. They add a file and
If only they
maybe
were all so obvious.
they go into a config file and they make a change like
You've been pwned.
Oops. Yep. All right. So at some point in the future, I come back to this machine. I'm like, hey, what's different about this machine? So now I can do an AIDE -- check. And what we should see is there's a new file called user bin haxer tools, and the Etsy issue has been modified. And because it's not like a giant pile of files that were installed from an RPM that I was expecting, this should be a much more targeted, hey, I should probably go look at these things because this is
Right.
not what I expect the state of the machine to be.
And this is perfect for things like, a hacker comes in, drops down a rootkit, or a job that runs frequently, or something, right? It should show up in this AIDE check.
All right, so there's my thing, and we get a little summary up here, right? So we got one new added file, we got 4 changed things. So Haxer Tools is my added file that changed things.
It got your Vim info file.
Yep. And I edited stuff.
Yeah.
And the user bin directory was updated because it now has a new file that is a component of it. And then it goes in and gives me a little bit more detail on like what about the Etsy issue has changed, right? The content changed, but we also have to see things like its modification timestamps,
Yeah.
its size, and we actually capture several different checksums with different algorithms. So we can see that those have all been updated. All right. So the last thing is, what if I expect a change or I'm not interested in tracking a change somewhere? So in the Etsy aid.conf, crazy file name, this is what, let me go to the top here. This is what is the configuration file for AIDE. And so we see things like, where's the directory where we store the AIDE databases? What's the AIDE database name that I want to run my checks against? So things like that. And then as we scroll down through the list, right, I mentioned that we track a bunch of metadata about the files. Well, here's the things of metadata about the files that
There
we
you
track.
go. So what's I?
Gonna make me look.
Yeah, well, you didn't
I know.
know. I know. There you go. So the inodes have changed.
All right. And then down a little bit further, we get into the like, this is the list of directories where we want to go through and capture all this metadata about the files and subdirectories. And so the reason that root's vim info got captured is because /root is the normal collection of information. But you can see that user source and user temp are exempted from being captured. So you could do like var could be exempted or var log could be exempted because those files
Right.
change. Not really interested in knowing that those files change.
Or
/
temp, for example. Yeah.
Etsy, it's like, well, you're going to go in and make changes to your configuration files. Maybe we don't care as much for those. And so here for Etsy, instead of tracking the normal metadata, we only track the perms metadata. If we scroll back up in the file, we can see what actual things perms means. It's basically a collection of those pieces of metadata that we're interested in. Right. So if you have an exclamation mark, it means don't bother tracking this thing. And then you can specify individual files as well that you want to make sure are checked, because Etsy as a whole is perms, but maybe Etsy group, you want the normal metadata tracking for that one file. So you can get really detailed in your AIDE conf if you're interested.
Cool. It's a really useful tool. There's also, you might have watched that demo and thought, yeah, but that feels really manual, right? Now, obviously, there's ways probably to automate that. But there's also another tool. We're not going to show it today because it's a little more complicated and it's not part of our top 5. But there's a tool called Keylime, also known as remote attestation, which leverages AIDE and a remote server that they'll talk to each other. So if AIDE triggers something, it'll tell Keylime, Keylime will tell the remote server, and then an admin can monitor that server, right? And you'll get an alert or something that you can then say, hold on, there's a system out there in the wild that's been modified, right? So really useful for like, I don't know, machines running in the back of a warehouse somewhere, or like payment terminals, right? Like things that are going to be in the hands of people that you really need to be careful about what they're doing with them, right? So good stuff. All right. So the next thing we want to talk about is fapolicyd, and that's file. Why am I blanking? It's not file access, right? It's file. The fapolicyd. Blanking on the damn name. Anyway, attestation, is it? I don't know. fapolicyd is a nice tool that lets you do application allow listing within your environment, right? So what it can do is it can build hashes and checksums and whatnot that it'll compare against executables or the packages they were installed from and tell you if they've been modified. So this is another layer of defense against the rootkit type stuff that Scott was just showing with his Hacksaw tools that he put inside a user bin. It is file access policy daemon. Okay, thank you, Scott, for looking that up. I don't know why I thought it wasn't access. Anyway, I have a quick demo here so we can jump into my terminal session. And I've already got fapolicyd installed. Much like tlog, the file you're looking for, or the package you're looking for, is literally called fapolicyd. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at the config file here just by pasting it in there. And you can see that there's a couple of configuration options that are already in there. A couple that I want to call attention to are things like what user it's running as. That might be important for your particular use case. This is permissive equals 0. Sort of like SELinux, you can set it to permissive mode, and then it'll just log things when there's problems. But permissive equals 0, in fact, means that it's enforcing, right? So it's actually going to act on the things that we have in this configuration file. I also want to point out integrity is set to none at the moment, and integrity is one of the things I want to show you. So we're going to actually modify this right now and change integrity. So we're going to edit. Actually, let's just, instead of me trying to type all this out a number of times, fapolicyd is one of those things that's tough to type. I'm just going to open it up in the best text editor, and down here where it says integrity. Now you might just say like integrity yes or no. That's not the case. You have to tell it what algorithm it's checking. And in the case of our example, we're going to use SHA-256. And to be honest, I'd have to dig to see what other options there are. So we're just going to save this. And we still don't have the daemon running, but what I wanted to do was show you a executable that we've pulled in from outside, right? So we're going to switch over to our RHEL user again. Right now, again, I could have done the SSH thing. My session is still being recorded, you might guess, because this is the same system I did our demo on earlier. But if we run cowsay moo, right? We have, what I did here is I went and got an external version of cowsay and put it into the home directory for RHEL. So this is not an RPM installed cowsay. If we look at this right here, you're going to see like, here's the package that I downloaded from the internet, and here is cowsay, right? So this is external, right? However, it's working. You're like, wait, we put fapolicyd on there. Why is it working? Because it's supposed to stop this sort of thing. That's because we didn't start the daemon yet, but I wanted to show that to you so you could see the difference. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to, instead of switching back to root, we're going to use sudo. Okay, and super secure password. Clear the screen again so you can see better. Now we're going to try to run cowsay again, and this time it's going to say, nope, you can't run cowsay because it's not in my list of things that are allowed to run on this machine, right? So pretty straightforward. But you might say, but I want to run cowsay. Cowsay is a thing I put there for a reason, and I need to be able to run cowsay. Well, there's good news. You can actually add an exception for cowsay or for whatever you're running. So let me just grab this command here too. We're going to, again, run that through sudo. fapolicyd-cli is the tool you use to interact with fapolicyd and tell it to do extra things, right? So we're going to add a new file to its known database of hashes, home RHEL cowsay. We're going to run that. And now if we look in the trusted file for cowsay, or not for cowsay, for fapolicyd, enter here. Oh, hold on. I hit up on accident. Make sure it didn't like break something on me. So now you can see we've got home RHEL cowsay in here, and there's a SHA-256 hash for it right there, right? So what that did is it made a hash out of the existing binary. If that binary were to change, it'll no longer match, right? And then it won't let you run it anymore. But if I run it now, let's just run cowsay again. Oh, I know what I forgot. You have to tell fapolicyd to update after you modify that database. So hold on.
So you're going to reload the daemon?
Well, I could reload the daemon, but there's a CLI command that just says update it from the known configuration, right? So now fapolicyd was notified, which basically says the CLI told fapolicyd, hey, refresh your database. And now if I run cowsay, it should work, right? So now we've got cowsay once again. Hey, Scott, did you know there's different ways? There's different models for cowsay?
Yes, I did know
There's
that. Thanks.
there's a
Apple.
bunch. I recommend that folks go check because I'm not going to go through them on today's show, but there's a whole bunch. You can make like Beavis say things instead of the cow. Anyway.
That's if like somebody puts executables in their home directory or like some weird spot.
Yeah.
What put them in, like we install new RPMs. Does fapolicyd automatically block those, or how does it choose what
See,
is?
now you're the one that's not reading ahead because that's exactly what I'm going to show you next. So that integrity checking that I put in place, right? What that tells fapolicyd to do is to use the integrity checksums that come from the RPMs when they're installed, that is logged in the RPM database, to verify that packages you've installed through your package manager still match the checksums from when they came out the door, right? So we're going to use cowsay and more, user bin more, or sorry, bin more as an example here. So just to show you there's nothing up my sleeve, if we do more, you can see it executes, but I didn't actually give it anything to do. So it just says bad usage because more expects some command line arguments. What we're going to do is we're going to take the binary that we just told fapolicyd is fine, and we're going to replace more with it. So we're going to go sudo cp cowsay / what is it, user bin or just bin? Just bin, I think. Yeah, bin more. Okay. Now, obviously, we're doing it through sudo because a normal user can't replace more. It's not supposed to be able to replace more. That's exactly how rootkits. You want rootkits? That's how you get rootkits. Anyway. Now, if I try to run more, now we know more is cowsay. So if I try to run more and then moo, operation not permitted. If I just try to run more, operation not permitted because I replaced that binary. It no longer matches the checksum that came from the RPM when it was installed. So that's basically how that operates. If I were to put more back, it should start to work again. So there's a really easy way to put more back. A second here. That comes from the package util-linux-core. We're just going to do a reinstall on that package. And I think you could have asked RPM, like what files have changed. There's an integrity check within RPM. We've probably talked about that in some other shows as well. All right, and now if I run more, again, why is operation still not permitted? It should have replaced it. I swear I tried this earlier and it worked.
Do you have to update your daemon one more time?
I don't know. I could just restart it quick.
Well, not as RHEL.
Oh, you're right. Maybe I forgot to test this. There
we go.
So yeah, that's what it was. fapolicyd had to be alerted, I guess, that it had changed. So there you go. Great utility for, do I have a rootkit? Did someone put something in place where it wasn't supposed to? If I had put cowsay inside of user bin and then tried to run it, it would have given me the same operation not permitted. So even if I'm putting extra executables on the system, configured in the way that we have it here, it should stop both of those things from running. Either, RPM installed binaries that have been changed or binaries that I've sort of side loaded in place, right? So,
well, I think that's something that we probably have lost track of over the years. Like it used to be really common for users to install software in their own home directory to run for their own purposes. And over the years, I think that's gone out of style. And yet it's still possible and it can still happen. So,
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a way that you as the administrator can like enforce that will not happen, right? You'll only software that's packaged and stuff that people put in their home directories and tar archives, or they've built their own binaries or whatever, you'll eliminate because you're using application allowed listing.
And once again, I think we're out of time to talk about firewalling. What do you think?
I mean, are. Is there something small that we could talk about? We debated doing a whole firewall show. Maybe this is the teaser for the whole firewall show.
Yeah, I kind of think we need a firewall D show, because honestly, there's so much we could go into. What I was going to talk about was firewall zones and how useful they can be, but I think that's a teaser. I think we just say, yeah, maybe next time we'll talk about, probably not next time, but sometime soon we'll talk about firewall D. What do you think?
Yeah, we'll put it on the pile of show ideas.
Yeah,
I
like
know that a lot of,
firewalls.
yeah, but like a lot of people are like, nope, not on my host. I just rely on the network guys, right?
Yeah,
So
so I've always gone with a defense in depth approach. Yes, you should have a network firewall. You should have an edge firewall, right? And there should be layers like onions from one to the next. However, a host-based firewall can protect you from, somebody's gotten past those defenses, or someone's used your web application or whatever it is that's remotely accessible on a particular host to get into your host. And now that host is the bad guy, right? So you want your other hosts to be protected from that host. And maybe there's not a network firewall in place to protect them from that host. Maybe there should be if you've got proper network isolation. But maybe you just don't want this web server and that web server to be able to attack each other, right? Host-based firewalls come into play then, right? And that's a really good way to get it done. Plus, I mean, the alternative is I've got a co-located machine which does not have a network firewall in front of it. And I had to depend on Firewall D to do things like set up zones to say, okay, these IPs are allowed to SSH in, but everybody else is not, right? So if you're in a case where you are like bare connected to the internet, that's a scary place to be sometimes, but your host-based firewall can really help there.
right on. We did pick up a fapolicyd question from Billy. He asked what would happen with Python or Bash scripts. So I wonder if we could toggle back into your machine and do just a quick hello world bash script in RHEL's home directory.
We can try. I think we'll be learning together though. So
What? You go off script. I don't know.
what could possibly go wrong? All right, here. All right, you got it. All right, good. Okay. So yeah, all right, let's just make a bash script. Vim hello.sh. So I'm thinking that this is probably going to work because the actual executable in play is bash.
Yeah, I think you want to
Not
shebang,
sh.
not a bang.
Yeah. That was a typo on my part, not intentional. And not vash either. This is not trigun. Anybody get that reference? All right, we'll just like echo. Okay.
Oh,
So
exclamation.
what?
You don't want the exclamation point with your double quotes.
Man, see, you see what happens here? Okay, fine. We'll just escape the exclamation point. How's that?
Good luck with that.
We're gonna find out. All right. I bet it runs. Oh, okay, so it didn't escape properly, but whatever. It did run. So yeah, I guess fapolicyd will not prevent it from running because, like I said, the actual executable in play here is bash. So it's interpreting a bunch of commands through bash in the same way that an interactive shell would, right? So ideally, though,
I think the same is true for as long as you're using like one of the system installed Pythons and not your own like private executable.
Yeah. Yeah, as long as it's an executable that came with the distribution with RHEL, it should execute it. If you've sideloaded Python, then it wouldn't. But you might argue like, what's the real threat here, right? Because you haven't put an extra binary in, you haven't sideloaded a rootkit, you haven't modified bin ls to do nasty things every time you execute it. You've just made a quicker, more efficient way to run a bunch of commands you would have been able to run through bash anyway, right?
Yeah. I would guess that the genesis for the question was, well, users also create their own things like shell scripts or Pythons. And like, it's great that we don't let them import compiled binaries or compile their own binaries. But what about these interpreted languages that they kind of do use all the time? Would that work? And yes, it works.
Yep. Seems like the answer is yes, it would still work. So there's a couple tools that are useful when managing with accounts. And the context here is like you have maybe a temporary account, like for a contractor or something, or maybe it's actually a temporary employee, or perhaps an employee when you know that maybe their last day is a certain day and you want to make sure that their account gets locked out when, or either you want to lock it out right now or you want to lock it out on a certain date. So a couple tools for that. We're also going to talk about password tools because that's kind of relevant here. You could just change a password, or if a password's been compromised, whatever. Enough talk. Let's actually do some things. So first of all, I have a user called test user. And I'm showing you Etsy Shadow because you can see they have a full normal like user account here, right? They've got a password hash set. They've got, you know, some usual identity information and whatnot. The first thing I'm going to do is show you how to lock test user. So user mod is a tool that has a bunch of user modification flags that you can use. -L is to lock an account. We're just going to say lock test user because, you know, test user, whatever, we want to lock that account. Now, if we look back at Etsy Shadow, you're going to see that at the beginning of the password hash, see before here, we had the hash, right? It just started with this quote. Afterward, you use the, afterward, you'll see that it's got an exclamation point before the password hash, right? That means that it's locked out. It means that, yes, there's a password hash in there. We haven't lost the user's password. But now if they try to log in, their password's not going to work, right? And I forget. They may even get a note that they've been locked out, okay? But obviously, we still have the hash, and there's a reason why it might matter that we still have the hash. That is if we want to unlock the account. So if we go back up and change the -L to a -U, this will unlock the user, right? Now, if we look at the shadow file again, we'll see that exclamation point is gone. And these quotes, I really think that that Google Docs has bit me again here, Scott. Those quotes are not supposed to be there. Those were thrown in there by a copy and paste fail from Google. Stupid.
So Nate, quick question.
Transformations. Sure.
Why would we lock the account instead of deleting the account?
Well, so this could be, you know, there's a temporary reason to lock this account. Or we want to make sure the person can't log in because, I don't know, maybe there's a legal hold on their account. Maybe they've been terminated, but we need to be able to see what they had in their home directory. Maybe they're away on vacation, and our policies are that these accounts get locked out while they're on vacation. I've seen things like that in like financial institutions, for example, that while people are away, they're actually spot checked for any, you know, malicious stuff, right? So maybe those are reasons you might want to do that. All right, so moving on to our next tools, there's sometimes need for changing somebody's password in a quick and easy way, or perhaps just like right from the command line here. And of course, you could just do password, PASSWD, and then the user's name, the user's username, that is. And then it'll prompt you interactively to type in the new password, right? That's not really great. I mean, you can do it that way, obviously, but I think it's better to use something like this, right? What we're doing is we're echoing what we want the new password to be through password, passwd, and we're giving it the --stdin flag, which says use standard input to set the password for test user. Now you hit enter and boom, now they've got a new password. If we were to look back at the Etsy Shadow file, you see here that the hash is now completely different than it was before. And, you know, now their password's been changed. Personally, and Scott, you can disagree with me if you want, I don't love that because the password is now in plain text, one on my screen, which isn't that big of a deal, but it's in root's history, right? That's not a great place for a password to be saved. And if I've done this in a script, that means that the script has a plain text password right there in the script. So if you don't like those things, like I don't, then there's another option, which is user mod. There's another flag for user mod that will let you pass in a hash for the password. But of course, that means you need a hash. So there's other tools that'll help you make a hash. Now, this might sound convoluted and extra. However, I did this with Kickstart files, right? Kickstart, you're building a server in an automated fashion. Maybe you want to do something like set the root password to a certain standard that you know is across the board, or maybe you're adding an automation user as part of that Kickstart, and you don't want the clear text password stored in that. This is a perfect use case for that because you can take the time to generate the hash and then put it into the script. And then if someone gets your script, sure, they're going to know that hash is everywhere, but they're not going to know what the hash is. They're not going to know what that actually reverses to. So there's two tools for that. One of them is a tool you have to install. It's called mkpassword, and it'll go interactively. So if I wanted to do, well, what was it? Some password I used before. And then it'll just give you, here's the hash for some password. Now you might notice that the hash is different. That's probably because it used a different salt. I think those are generated on the fly. mkpassword has flags you can pass in that says what salt to use and all that stuff if you have standards that you need to follow. The other one is OpenSSL, which is a tool that might already be on your system because that's a pretty standard tool. It might even be included in the RHEL base. But OpenSSL, you do password, PASSWD. That tells OpenSSL to invoke that particular algorithm. And then -6 tells it, I think, what version of the hash to use, right? Maybe I'm wrong about that. But you do that, and again, it's an interactive thing. But it'll ask me to verify it. And as long as I type them both right, boom, there we go. We have a hash there. Now, what do we do with the hash? Well, we just take that hash that we just made. It's already copied to my clipboard. If I do -p, which tells it to set the password. And if you look at the man page, it says to use a crypted password, not the plain text password. And I like to put them in quotes just because it does have a $sign in that hash, if you notice, and Bash will sometimes say, oh, that's a variable, and try to, try to read that variable from the system's environment. But if we paste that in, close the single quotes, and then tell it what user, test user, then it should set that exact hash inside of Etsy password, or Etsy shadow, I should say. Okay, there we go. So that's, and notice the quotes aren't there now. So no copy and paste fail this time. Stupid Google.
So Nate, I think we are set up for a server with GUI or server without GUI type holy war.
Oh, I will fight you.
So here's why I like echoing the password in. mkpassword is a great utility. And it can, one of the other things it can do is make random passwords, right? So it'll make like a 8-character password with a mix of case and numbers and, okay. But if you're resetting somebody's password, you have to tell them what the password is. Otherwise, how do they know how to log in?
Yeah, well, that's why I'm saying if you use OpenSSL or mkpassword and you give it a password, then you can give that to the user.
Yes, but you have to remember it because you didn't, you typed it in. You typed it in, but it's not stored anywhere. So if you're doing things like scripting, you could do something like call mkpassword, which makes the password, then send that to a mail command where it'll like stick it in, but it will end up being passed around plain text, but you're also trying to distribute it to the user in plain text. So like it all kind of works out. I get not wanting to have it locally in your possession so that somebody could compromise the root account and then start knowing all these other user accounts. Although I would also argue that if they compromise the user account or the root account, you probably have bigger problems.
Well, yes, this is probably true. So what I'm going to say is there are valid use cases for both scenarios, which is why I showed you both.
Fair enough.
And I'd love to hear in the chat, folks, tell us which one you prefer. Do you like passing in a clear text password, or do you like using a hash like I did? I think I know what the answer is going to be. We'll see.
We should just write it on a sticky note and put it under our keyboard.
Yeah, that's probably the way to go. Just the sticky notes. Sticky notes are good. All right, I had one last thing, and this is how to lock out an account using chage or chage, however you want to pronounce that. And this is for account aging, right? So this is great for either a temporary account, someone who you know is going to be here for 60 days or 90 days or whatever, like, like a contract worker. Or if you know someone's leaving on a certain date, you can change the age or the lockout date of their account. So first, let's do chage-l, which will list the aging information for test user, right? Now, it tells us right here, the last password change was today because, I kind of just did that. And the account will not expire. It's set to never. The password is not inactive, right? And sorry, password does not expire. Neither does the, all right, listen, browser, stop popping things up in front of me. Anyway, the expirations are all set to never at this point. So if I were to say, here, I'll copy and paste this so I don't have as much chance of typos. We copy and then paste. There's no funny quotes in this one, so it shouldn't be a problem. We're going to use chage to set the expiration to yesterday for test user. Right? Now, if I do the -L again, it tells me account expires yesterday, right? So the account still shows up on the system. The account is still there, but you won't be able to log in with it. And I just want to do that, show you what it looks like in Etsy Shadow one more time. You'll see this number here has been added. That is the expiration date, or I should say the password expiration date for the account, or the lockout date, if you want to call it that. So, I'm showing you this just so that you know that these things end up somewhere, and that somewhere is either Etsy password or Etsy Shadow. In this case, they've all ended up in Etsy Shadow. Okay, so just to show you what this looks like for poor old Bob, the test user, let's go to a normal user, because root will still be able to SU over to test user. So I'm going to a normal user first, and now I'm going to SU-to test user, and it asks me for their password. Now, you might remember I set that to some password. Your account has expired. Please contact your system's administrator. So there we go. Account has expired. Now, of course, you can fix that with chage, or you could instead maybe enforce a password reset or something, however it is that you want to handle that. But there you go. That's how chage works. And I think that's all I had for the critical path. Anything new? Any questions came in? Any more arguments you want to have, Scott?
Oh, I always like picking fights. No, we some recommendations from the audience, which is good. We're going to switch to the deeper dive. So stay with us. Now is the time where we'll do like audience question and answer if we see things in the chat that are interesting. Remember, if you're a deferred viewer, you're always welcome to leave a comment. And I was just remarking to Granite Penguin that we see him live in the chat today. I often respond to Granite Penguin's comments. So he has experienced the Scott responsing.
The Scott sponsing?
That's right. All right, before Nate, I did want to touch on central auth. So in our critical path, we talked about locally configured users, which if you have 1,000 machines, would be extremely tedious to manage because you
Sure.
don't touch all those 1,000 machines. So what kind of central auth things can we do?
Yeah. Now, granted, if you're managing thousands of machines, at the very least, I'd be surprised if you didn't have some automation. So you're not touching them, but something is. But there is a better way, and that better way would be centralized authentication. It's just so much easier to deal with accounts at that level, right? Even if you have thousands of accounts and only a few servers, right? Because you can do the management centrally. Now, of course, Red Hat has a solution for that for RHEL called Identity Manager, IDM, based on the free IPA upstream. But there's also a really common use case for centralized authentication in the Windows world, which is Active Directory. And since that's usually in existence already in a lot of environments before centralized authentication for Linux is even a thought, there are ways to use SSSD on RHEL to authenticate your RHEL systems directly to Active Directory. And of course, there's a billion third-party options that also get this done. Different sort of authentication shims that work with PAM, which is what Scott's going to talk about in a bit. That'll make it talk to several other sort of centralized authentication mechanisms. So just know that those things exist. We're not going to go deep into any demos on this. Eric and I are working on a mini series for IDM, which I don't think we have a date set on yet. But keep your eyes out for that. Subscribe to the channel, and you'll see when we bring those out and make them live.
Yeah, and a lot of the central authentication solutions rely on a couple of underlying technologies like LDAP and Kerberos. And so, free IPA can be configured to authenticate to a variety of things. SSSD takes a bunch of options for what you would like to configure it to authenticate against. So it can hook into AIDE, it can hook into just straight LDAP, it can hook into Kerberos realms, it can hook into a mix of LDAP and Kerberos realms. So there's a lot of options there if you're doing central authentication. So all this, however, even the central auth stuff relies on a locally running service or a locally available service on our machine called PAM. So if we jump into the terminal, we'll take a look at kind of how PAM works. All right. So, hey, Nate, when you log into a machine, did you know that over in etcpam.d that there is a file called login that has the rules for how we authenticate users to log in.
No, I totally didn't know that. Well, I mean, I did know that, but maybe other folks don't.
You can see some other files over here, SSHD. So there's
Yep.
a way that you can have PAM use, or you can have SSHD use PAM, and it would use the rules in the SSHD file. There's sudo, right? So when you run sudo and it's authenticating your user to make sure that you're allowed to sudo things, guess what it's doing? It's using the sudo PAM configuration file. So let's take a look at login for a second. So this is what it looks like. And essentially, PAM is used in a variety of ways to authenticate and set up users to be able to use the system. And so there are several types of rules. So you can see that first column in this file. We have auth rules, which will authenticate someone's identity. Account rules, which verify that their account is in good standing with the system. Password rules. If someone is trying to change their password, this is how we enforce those password changes. And the last set are session rules, which is after we've authenticated them and verified that their account is in good standing. These are the additional things we should do to establish their session with the system. So those are the general types of rules that you'll see in a PAM configuration: auth, account, password, and session. The second column is the severity of the rule. And we'll see a couple different options here. But the ones I'd like to draw your attention to are required and optional. All right, so required means that we're going to run something, we're going to test something, and you're required to get a valid value from that test. And if you don't get a valid value or you get a negative response from the test, you will be unable to progress. Optional, we're going to run this test and we'll get a value back from the test, but we really don't care what it is. If you pass the test, great. If you fail the test, that's okay too. There are a couple others that we will see in our PAM journey. We will see requisite. Requisite and required are similar. Required will actually, if you fail the test, it'll still continue processing the rest of the rules of that type. Whereas requisite, if you fail that test, we don't test any further. So we often see that required is used, but oftentimes requisite is not used, but you may see it sneaking around places. And the other thing that we don't see in this file, but we'll see in another one in just a minute, is sufficient. If you pass this test, that is sufficient that you don't have to pass any other rules that we're checking. So it's like good enough. If you pass this one, it's good enough. All right, and then the third column is the PAM library that is called, right? We're going to do something to test the state of something or to validate a piece of data, and that's going to come back with a true or false value. And what we're seeing there in that third column is the actual executable or shared object library that's going to be invoked to test some criteria. You can see a little bit further down in this session rule that's optional right here. So these libraries can take arguments. So in this case, we're passing the force argument and the revoke argument. And those arguments can customize the behavior of this test. All right. So that's kind of the overview of what we're looking at in one of these files. But then there's some other weird stuff that I just kind of glossed over, like substack and include. So substack says we're going to test a certain amount of stuff from another file in the PAM configuration, and include is a similar thing. We're going to include rules of this type from another file. So it's common to do things like check someone's password. And so we could put the PAM test, check someone's password in login and SSHD and SU and sudo and like all these individual configuration files. Or because it's so common, we could put it in one place, system auth, and then everybody checks it there. That way, if we want to make a change, like add an argument to how passwords are being checked, we can add it to the system auth entry. And because everyone else refers to that other file, us changing that file makes everybody else pick up the change. All right, so that's what the include in Substack does, is it allows us to reference rules stored somewhere else for this service or PAM check. All right, so now it starts to get pretty complicated, because if we look over at system auth, so there's more account, auth, password, and session rules. And those were included from our login set of rules that we had to check. And so I kind of mashed these two files together so we could trace through what a sample login authentication would look like. All right. So on the left side is the rules from login. And at several points, we saw that the login rules called the system auth rules. And so what I did was I put the system auth rules on the right side, and I positioned them in the correct locations. And so that's why there's like gaps between the two of them, is because we like go over here and check some rules, and then we come back over here, and then we go over here to check some rules, and then we come back over here. All right. So if you're logging into the system on one of the TTYs, we're going to authenticate your user, right? Did you provide me the right password for a user that exists on the system? So the PAM login file says, oh, we should use the rules out of system auth for that. So there are 3 rules over in system auth. The first one is required. So we're going to set some environment variables, and the PAM env library will always return a true value unless you're not able to execute it for some reason. So if you're not able to run PAM env, that's when you get a failure. And notice this is a required rule. So if you fail a required rule, you're not able to authenticate. But the environment variable setting stuff in PAM is pretty much bulletproof. So you're going to get a pass on that. Like you'd have to have maybe somebody deleted this file. That's how you would fail that rule. All right, the next one is a sufficient rule. So if you pass this sufficient rule, that's good enough, and we don't have to check anything else. And we make a call to PAM Unix. PAM Unix is the thing that does Unix style authentication. So we asked you for your password and your account, like your username, and we're going to go over, we're going to check it against something to make sure that that's the right stuff. And so I'm going to put Nate on the spot. Nate, when you're checking a username and password on a machine, where do you look?
For a local machine, it'd be etc password and etc shadow.
Yep. And so PAM Unix takes that user account you gave as your username, checks it against etc password, takes that password you gave, checks it against etc shadow. And if you are successful in doing that, then you've proved that you're authorized or authenticated to the system. We can go back over to login, and we can run that next auth rule, which is called post login. But if you gave me the wrong username and password, and we're not able to validate it with our standard Unix authentication stuff, then you get a PAM deny call, and PAM deny will always fail. Always. And because it's required, because you failed the required rule, you can't authenticate to the system. All right, now the reason that we do this, and let me go into edit mode here, is if we had multiple ways to authenticate people. So we we're just talking about authenticating against a central authentication location. So if you were to configure, say, LDAP, what would happen is if you use one of the Red Hat tools to configure yourself against LDAP, it would put a extra rule in system auth and probably a couple other places. Like this. So there's a library for PAM called PAM LDAP that handles LDAP authentication. And so What we would do is if you're logging into the system, we'd first check to see if you're giving me a local user account. And if you're giving me a local user account, that's good enough. You've proved that you've authenticated. But if you fail to give me a local user account, then I'm going to check the LDAP server. And if you gave me a correct LDAP server user account and password, that's good enough, and I'll let you into the machine. But if you neither give me a local account, nor give me a LDAP server user account that's correct, then you get PAM deny, which doesn't let you authenticate. Right? So the more authentication methods you configure for the machine, the more of these sufficient rules you'll see in there, because we're going to try them in order to see if, is it from this person or is it stored over here in this source, so that we can give you multiple different ways of potentially authenticating the machine.
And this may be off script, but does PAM have an implied deny at the end? So if someone were to do something dumb like drop that PAM deny, would they still get denied if they didn't succeed in any of these, or would it default to letting them in? That'd be silly.
Yeah, so it depends on what the other rules are. But
Right.
yes, if you pass the required rule of PAM-ENV, and you didn't get either of the sufficient rules because you didn't have a local user account or an LDAP user account, well, you're not required to pass a sufficient rule. So potentially you passed all the required rules, and that's good enough. So the PAM deny is there to make sure that if you don't match any of the sufficients, you will denial. And it's required, which means if you fail it, you can't authenticate. So yeah, ordering in these files can be important. The actual libraries that are called can be important. So that's
now that can be daunting to edit by hand like this. So there are tools that make this easier. I don't know if you had mentioned that. I was busy looking at chat. But there's auth-config, I think, still exists, or something similar to it that'll help you configure PAM rules.
Yeah. And in fact, if we look at the original PAM configuration files that I went from, system auth, notice that it says at the very top, there's a comment that says this file is auto-generated. The next time you run auth select, it'll obliterate this file.
And there you go. Auth select. That's the tool I'm looking for.
Yeah. So if you're using manual changes to this file, you can't use any of the automated stuff anymore because it'll not know about your manual changes. All right. So I wanted to, now that we kind of understand the flow of PAM, I want to come back and actually show some changes. All right. So our first one, I mentioned that PAM libraries will take options. So I'm going to become the RHEL user. And I'm going to look at the umask for the RHEL user. And Nate, something that's bothered me recently was there was a change in umask behavior in RHEL 9, where if you were in a private group, it set your umask more restrictively to remove write permissions from the group by default. And I couldn't figure out where that was coming from, but I figured out when we were setting up for this episode.
Learn something new every day.
Yeah, we used to set the umask in one of the login files in one of the, I think it was etc bash rc. That no longer is how we set it. Instead, in post login, we have these session rules, and these session rules are to craft the user's session on the machine. And one of them is PAM umask, which sets the user's umask.
Well, now you know. Now you know what to file a bug against if you don't like it.
And so what we can do is we can change the options passed to PAM umask to change its behavior.
Very nice.
Passing the argument saying my machine uses user private groups or user groups, the PAM library that's responsible for setting the umask for your session, there you go. Sets it to the user private group umask instead.
Or you can just dump umask 0002 into everyone's bash RC.
That's right.
Totally inefficient, but
every new user that you create too, because you got to keep propagating the change.
Yeah.
Or you can just
hope it never changes, because then you have to change it for all the users.
Right. Or you can just add an argument to the spam library, and there you go. It's now effective for all users that log into the machine that have their username and their primary group name are the same things.
Stop with your simple and efficient administration ideas.
I refuse. The other thing I wanted to show you is we talked about like how you could add different authentication sources. Well, it turns out there are additional PAM libraries you can add too. And a bunch of them come with RHEL. So like the LDAP one, the IDM or IDM or AD integration stuff, that all comes with RHEL. But there are others that are extra. And where do we go for extra packages, Nate?
Apple.
That's right.
It's in the name, extra packages for enterprise Linux.
So I'm just going to do a DNF list available for PAM. And you can see that, oh, whoops. Well, this machine doesn't have Apple installed. Well, that's not great.
Poor planning, Scott.
Yep. Well, I used a different sandbox for last night when I was doing all my testing.
At least you didn't give poor Bob a generic username like test user. I'm so embarrassed.
Indeed. All right, 1 second. I'm grabbing.
Scott is frantically Googling for the command to enable Apple.
That's right.
And of course, the reason it's not enabled out of the box is because these are extra packages that are not supported by Red Hat support. So when you install a RHEL system, Apple is certainly an option. It can certainly give you things that are not included with RHEL. Just keep in mind that not supported by Red Hat.
All right, let's see here. All right, so we'll install the Apple repository. And then I'll do my DNF list again. And it's downloading all the metadata from Apple. There we go. All right. So you can see there's a PAM radius. So if you have a radius server, you can authenticate that with PAM radius.
Man, radius. You're taking me back. Back. Radius.
Use it. Of course, some people still use RHEL 4, but you can like authenticate with your YubiKeys. And the one I'm going to throw is PAM 2FA, right? Which is for two-factor authentication.
Good choice. There was a lot of conversation about multi-factor and two-factor in the chat. So there you go. Good choice there, Scott.
Well, sometimes I make good choices.
Yeah.
Not often.
You saw the future and you knew this.
All right. So when you install a module, so for example, we have some that already came with RHEL, like PAM Unix. They have man pages. So if you wanted to read about like what arguments you can pass or what the arguments do, there's documentation for all of these. But I just installed PAM 2FA. And unfortunately, PAM 2FA does not have a man page. It does, however, have a markdown-based README. All right, so it says, hey, here's PAM 2FA. You could do two-factor authentication, including things like Google Authenticator, YubiKey, OTP. So there's a bunch of options for how you're doing your two-factor authentication. All right, we don't need to worry about building it because we got it from Apple already built. All right, and then it says, okay, to use this, you need to put this into your thing, into your PAM config. So, oops, we're going to go into etc pam.d systemauth. We're just going to throw it in there. Right, that's cool.
Good idea. What could go wrong?
Yeah, we can put it anywhere we want. Can't we?
Probably not.
No.
Shouldn't it be after the env at least? Or it should be after the password, like after the PAM Unix?
Well, who knows? But let me tell you some decision criteria you might use. So I like your idea that should be below PAM-EV because we know that sets environment variables for the
Yeah.
PAM. All right. So let's fix that. All right. Now, should it be above or below PAM Unix? So PAM Unix checks for local user accounts. So if it's okay that somebody types in their username and password, and that is all that's needed, then maybe it should be below.
Well, and I don't know if this is the right way to do it or not, but in my brain, I'm thinking you change PAM Unix to required, not sufficient, and the MFA to also required, right?
So I think you don't want to do that because if you change the PAM Unix to required, that means I am requiring a local user account
Oh, okay.
to log in. So I actually think that maybe for the purposes of this, we could do something like that. And then depending on what you want to do, you could change it to be sufficient. So it's okay if you have a local username and password without two-factor authentication. Maybe that's what the PAM Unix line currently says.
Yeah,
And 2FA,
that's what I was thinking.
yeah, so what we could do is this. Which says, okay, if you authenticate with your two-factor authentication, that's good enough. And we don't have to go any further. But if you're not able to authenticate with two-factor, if you're a local user account, that would also be acceptable. Or
But isn't the whole
maybe,
point of two-factor that I'm forcing you to do both? It should be a password and the second factor. That's why I thought they should be set to required.
so if you are using two-factor, that's good enough. But that's the only thing that's good enough. So if you don't successfully authenticate with two-factor, you get that PAM deny, which kicks you out.
Okay. Does the two-factor module also ask you for your password then?
It will. And so if we go
There.
back,
That's what I'm missing. Okay. I didn't
Yes.
look at the man page.
That's probably my fault. All right. So down here, they give you the arguments that can be passed to the two-factor module.
Okay.
Things like your LDAP URI, right? What's the LDAP server that you authenticate against? Or the Google authentication stuff that you authenticate against. So there's options there. Or maybe we do PAM Unix where we log in with their username and password. That's good. But then we also require that they put in a token or something with two-factor. So it would be good enough to have the local user account, but you also are required to put in the two-factor, token code or something in order to complete the authentication. But ordering is important. The severity that you type is important because that's going to dictate how PAM treats the requirements for your login. All right, so I'm going to do something silly. Oops. All right. So here's what I've done. Nate, you'll notice that I've not added any arguments to my 2FA.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's no way I can.
Bad.
Yeah. And it's required, so like it's going to fail. So right, so it'll ask me, hey, what's your password? Oh, hold on. That worked. I wasn't expecting it to work. Oh, I remember why. Hold on. I put it in the wrong file.
Oh, we have these tests, Scott.
That's right. So I added my stuff over in system auth.
Oh, but not SSH or remote auth or whatever it's called.
Password auth, yeah. So all right, so let's try this. There we go. All right, now that I've properly broken the system,
broken it in the right way.
That's right. Not broken it in the wrong way that I can't troubleshoot and fix. All right. So this is the same kind of dialogue that you would get if you put in the wrong password. And I know that was a question earlier. We were talking about it earlier with like, if I lock a password, what happens? This is the kind of thing that happens. We don't want to give away information that the state of the machine is the problem. So even though we're failing this PAM call, we're not told it's because we're failing this PAM call. However, as root on the local machine, we are told right here, bam, PAM 2FA is failing because there's no configured second factors. And then we end up not being able to pass our PAM config because even though I'm providing the right password, I'm not able to get a valid response on the PAM 2FA library call. And again, if we do something like change the severity of our rule, so I went from required to optional. Now it doesn't matter whether I pass or fail the PAM 2FA module. Right, it lets me log into the system. Now it did provide the local user account some error messaging saying, hey, this thing's not working right. You should contact somebody. But that was because I was successfully able to authenticate with my local user account, which allowed me to progress through the PAM stack of authentication checks, session checks, and account checks.
Congratulations.
So,
You've successfully configured, but incorrectly, multi-factor.
well, and if we looked at the varlog secure, it would still complain that we're failing that check, right?
Right.
So if you're messing around with PAM stuff, and two words of warning. One, have an open session as root, because even root authenticates with PAM. So if you mess with PAM, you can't authenticate anymore. You're not going to be able to authenticate new root sessions. So have
You
an
can lock
open,
yourself out pretty good if you mess up PAM good enough.
yeah. So you have an open login session so that you can use that to change anything that might be incorrect. Test, and then look at things like varlog secure to verify that your tests aren't producing errors that maybe you just aren't noticing because other PAM checks are passing because you have the wrong severity or something else.
So we're going to be talking about compliance today with OpenSCAP, right? And Josh has a decent background in security and compliance and whatnot, so we thought we'd bring him in for the show. So, Josh, do you want to hop into our critical path demo here? We're going to talk about kind of scanning for compliance and what OpenSCAP tools are available to us, and then in the deeper dive, we're going to talk a little bit more about why, right? So
absolutely right. So just to lay down some groundwork, that OpenSCAP is the tool that we're using for security automation that can be used to check and enforce security configurations. To get started with this, let's just jump on in. First, we're going to install OpenSCAP. And this is simple enough. We can just go sudo yum install OpenSCAP-scanner. We're doing TAC-Y for yes for automatic install, for saying, yes, I want to install these packages. Next, we're going to go through and install the SCAP security guide. And that's a install TAC security TAC guide. Once that's installed, we should be good to go. From here, I'm realizing that I might have grabbed the same terminal that we've already been working with, which is awesome. Let's go paste. This is the way to be able to verify that things have been downloaded in the right order. So you can see underneath user share XML SCAP SSG. We'll go over a little bit more of this later. But the long story short is we see this RHEL 9 is installed. All right. So to get ourselves up and running, let's find out what OpenSCAP goes through and the commands that we need to go through and do. So we can just simply go OSCAP. And we've got our usages, our different commands. So we're going to go OSCAP, put our commands in, module and operation. So as an example, we're going to do this guy, which is OpenSCAP info. We're finding out information about the SSG for RHEL 9, which is the security guide. There are a lot of different frameworks that you can go through and harden your system to. So we've got STIGs, we've got the CIS benchmark. So that's what we have here. We can see that there's benchmark for level 2 server, benchmark for level 1 server, level 1 workstation, and level 2 workstation. We'll go more into the details or the differences between there. And let's go ahead and get this thing kicked off. We're going to start off with the super basic just for the demo purposes for now. We're going to go with the CIS server 1. So let me clear the screen again here and let's paste this. So we're going sudo OpenSCAP. We're running a couple of different commands here to be able to evaluate our system. And the profile is going to be for the CIS server level 1 for RHEL 9. So let's go ahead and hit enter. This is going to take a minute or so for it to run. Not too long because it's just doing a, hey, here's the snapshot of what your system currently looks like. Nate, you have anything to add?
So this is actually going out and checking the configuration on the system, and it's comparing it to the configurations that are defined within the SCAP security guide. So this will actually give you pass-fail on all the different rule sets and whatnot that are in there. So pretty handy tool.
Absolutely.
Great
right?
for baselining, right?
Absolutely. That's the important point, is that if you're a sysadmin coming blind or you just inherited systems that you have no idea where the compliance level is, this is a great place to find out where your starting point is before you start changing anything. So this will only take another minute or so. The cool thing is that it comes up with the title, the rule, and the identifier, which if you're in compliance or you need to be able to say that you're compliant with a certain ID, this one says the CCE and then the number. It's a great way to be able to cross-reference. So it's done running pretty quick. Let's go ahead and make a report from this. And let's make sure we get the copy.
Yeah, so it's great that it outputs it to the screen, but you can actually have it generate a report file, which you can then save and view offline, which is pretty handy.
And compare to your other machines, maybe that's on your network or the before and after when you harden, right? So in this case, we're going sudo OSCAP. We're going to generate report, and then we're telling the output is going to be OpenSCAP_report-file. And let's go ahead and hit enter on this. This won't take that long. Yes, we can absolutely clear the screen to be able to see the full command here. Let me cancel this, go clear. And I'll do that every time from here moving forward. So as we go through and generate the report, tac output, it's going to do it to this. It's not going to take that long because it's converting it from an XML over to an HTML file, because you can do this and either just a report that you can look on the command line, or you can also do it as HTML. We're just going to go through and look through it through an old school terminal browser called Lynx. This gives us the ability to look at web pages just in our console.
Yep. So Lynx is a text mode web browser. If anybody's not familiar with it, you can view this in a full browser as well. But to be honest, the output isn't much better. It's a pretty simple. It's a pretty simple thing, but maybe it's easier to read if you have it in a browser.
Right. So as an example, if you only had this on a server versus over on a GUI system, you could still look at this if you didn't SCP it over to your box or such. So if we scroll down here, we can actually see the scoring system. And of course, I did this on the same box after I did a hardening. So that's awesome. We can go through and talk about that a little bit more, because apparently when I opened up a second tab, my demo system is good. It's already hardened. So we can go through and see from the scoring system percentage-wise how hardened this box is. By default, this is much lower before you go through and harden things. And if we go through and quit, I think we're ready to go into the next section.
All right, so we went over some of the basics here, right? So you can see how to scan your system, how to output a report. In the deeper dive, though, you're going to want to stick around, because we're going to talk about how to actually remediate some of those things. We're going to touch on what these rule sets are, why you should care, what the differences might be between different levels of CIS, and we're going to show you a couple more examples and whatnot. Josh, I mentioned at the beginning of the show that you've got a little more of a background in security. You want to talk just like really briefly about why the heck it is we have you talking about OpenSCAP instead of just me or Scott?
Absolutely. So my background is working as a DoD contractor. Did this for 5-6 years as a Linux system admin in disconnected air-gapped networks. So was responsible for hardening everything up to STIG levels. So I love working with security, love working with Linux. So I'm here to be able to say, hey, here's the beginning onboarding steps on how to get up and running. And the first important step is to find out where that baseline is. So if we have something to be able to jump off of, we can then start hardening for our environment. And it's not cookie cutter. It definitely needs to have customizations for your environment. So we have the frameworks there to be able to reference and then jump in deeper.
And I feel like it's worth mentioning, even though we didn't make this a topic for the show. Well, I think we have had a previous show about the Insights compliance tool. If you've got RHEL, you have Insights. If you got your system registered with Insights, you can install that SCAP security guide tool that Josh showed earlier. And then Insights can actually do similar work to what we just showed at the command line. So just keep that in mind. Put it in your back pocket if you want something that's a little more, GUI related, right? So
absolutely right. So
Josh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go for it, Nate.
I was going to say, what's OpenSCAP?
Absolutely. So it is actually a shorthand for the Open Security Content Management or Application Protocol. So it's a command line tool that's helped us perform configuration and vulnerability scans on our local system. The idea is that we're trying to make sure we find out what framework we're trying to apply and then either find out the status of our system compliance, or we actually can enforce that as well.
Cool. So basically, this is a way to easily, I should say, maybe more easily, not just scan, but apply rule sets to our systems. And trust me, we're going to show that a little bit later in the show. So, but why do we care?
Why do we care? That's a fantastic question. We care because if we're trying to make sure that there are not intruders who can get into our systems, we're trying to make it a little bit harder for them to do so. We're never going to be hacker proof or breach proof, but we can absolutely do our due diligence to make sure that our systems are hardened to a reasonable level and making sure it's not too much of a pain in the butt for our users either.
And everybody's favorite word is compliance, right? So whether we're doing this to do our due diligence or whether we're doing this because we've been asked to, some of us in the world of systems administration have to adhere to certain compliance standards, right? So this is another way to help you get into compliance, right? So you could have an auditor come in and say, this is all the stuff you have to do, and then you can manually go find and do all the things. Mm-hmm. If you harden your systems using OpenSCAP before that ever happens, then that list should be a lot shorter.
It should be. And this also depends on what type of industry that you're in. There are going to be these different frameworks. And while we're focusing on CIS today, there are a couple different levels that go along with that. We'll cover other frameworks in the future. And it's going to be interesting to see. There are a lot of crossovers with the same controls or the same reasons that you would go through and do something on like a CIS versus a STIG. So on the CIS side of the house, the level ones, you usually start off with, here's the core minimum that you want to get started with. And then when we were looking at that list of a level 2, those are going the above and beyond, or the more advanced features to start locking things down a bit more.
So we're throwing around the term CIS a lot. What is the CIS?
Absolutely. The CIS is another, again, acronym. It's for the Center of Internet Security. So it is a nonprofit responsible for creating these controls and benchmarks. So from their site, they're saying they're globally recognized as best practices for securing IT systems and data. Long story short, it's to help people, businesses, and governments protect themselves against pervasive cyber threats, as they're long and short.
So would you say that CIS is probably maybe like a good starting point for even folks who maybe aren't mandated to follow certain standards, but it would be just good practice?
I would tend to agree with that. Yes. The STIG side of the house is much more stringent. CIS is much more globally accepted. So that would be like number 1 would be CIS. Number 2 would be STIG. I'm also slightly biased because of my background. I think it's a good starting platform for everybody though.
Right. And there's 2 levels of CIS. I assume the second level is a little more stringent. First level might be a little bit less stringent. And then there's even a variant for workstation, right? So if you needed to harden your workstations, you can apply the CIS workstation benchmark, which is also kind of cool. It's nice that it exists.
Because you've got the GUI applications that aren't necessarily there installed on the server side, and makes sense to have 2 different sets of hardening levels, right?
Right. All right, so we have another demo, but before we do that, I'm going to ask, did we have any questions that we should try to answer before we get there? Or, I mean, we're gonna Okay, is it possible to check just for specific controls of CIS compliance and also fix those? So I can answer, can you fix those? Yes, we're going to show that in a minute.
Absolutely.
But Josh, can we check for specific controls? I don't know if we can get that granular.
So you can go through and customize this to where you are only checking for X, Y, or Z. You can comment it out in the XML. There's a couple different viewers for that. So yes, it's just not there by default.
It's not just like a command line argument you can throw in to say, don't check for these, only check for that. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Right. You're going to change it individually for your files. And I would usually recommend making a copy of your file before you go through and change the original, and then say, here's your customization number 1 for your organization name, etc.
Okay. Did we have any other questions? I think I saw one just pop in, which we kind of touched on, but didn't really cover in depth. Here we go. Came from Rick.
Okay.
How does CIS benchmark compare to PCI? In other words, if you harden to CIS, will it pass a PCI audit? Now, the fact that there is another rule set for PCI makes me feel like the answer is no, it won't.
So, like I said before, there's a lot of rule sets that cross over, like between CIS and STIG. There are some rule sets that will cross over from CIS over to PCI, but it's not a 100% mapping. So if your organization requires you to be PCI compliant, you could go CIS, but it's only going to get you partway there. While we're talking about OpenSCAP today, scanning it for compliance is one deal. Hardening it, in some use cases, when you're actually trying to remediate it to a certain level, is going to be different in your organization. You may not have your machine set up correctly to do that out of the box, and it may require a reinstall and enforcing those on the installation of the OS, which you guys have gone over in the past on the drop-down install options.
Yep. We'll have to find a link to that episode as well. We'll put that in the notes.
Absolutely.
All right. We did a CIS scan. We did a scan for CIS level 1.
Correct.
I think we have another demo. We're going to compare that to the CIS level 2, right? So if we want to hop back to the terminal, we can do that.
Absolutely. So one of the things, I just updated or grabbed a different box and reran through everything. So I do want to do our last 2 steps again, just to make sure everybody sees what the hardness level is from just a scanning of your system. And let's go take a look at this report. So if we scroll down now, so as compared to before the break, I was on a different box. I just ran through just the checking to see where the default level is of a RHEL 9 install for this purpose. So it's 77.22% to get started. Right.
So this is like a clean install. You haven't applied any SCAP policies to this machine, whereas the one you were using before the break, you'd already done some work to apply.
Yes.
So okay.
That is
all right.
correct.
So this is the base level. This is the CIS level 1. Correct. 77% roughly, or 77 score. I don't know if that's a percentage.
It is a percentage. Yep.
Maximum is 100. So there you go.
You got it. So great. So if we go through and we can quit out of this terminal, if I scroll down my notes here, and if you wanted to go and see a scan of level 2, it's pretty simple. Again, we're just going to do a scan. We're not going to go through and change anything yet.
We're basically using the... Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good. The CIS level 2 is how you can see the file name called out for the different profile that we're now scanning against.
Right.
Go ahead.
So we're doing the same command. We're just telling it, use this other profile.
Correct. And make this easier on everybody. Let me clear this and put it back at the top of the screen.
Control L, man.
Control L. Okay. All right. Good call. There's always more than one way to do things in Linux. So it's going to run. It's going to go through and rerun through this. This will only take about a minute to go through and do this level 2 eval. And then I figured the next step that we could go through and talk about is applying CIS level 1 remediation. And then you can see the level that the machine comes to just for the level 1.
So again, this is CIS level 2, which means it's going to be slightly more stringent. We should expect a worse score because, again, we haven't changed anything yet. We didn't apply CIS level 1. So look at that. Billy Holmes didn't know about Control L.
Nice.
So you're not alone, Josh.
Absolutely. There we go. I'm here to learn and teach what I know, right? So let's do this thing. All right, so we've gone through and run it. Let's go ahead and check for that file now. we've got this, so we're going to open this with links.
Do you need to generate the HTML file first?
Yep. Oop, good call. And of course, that's the one area I didn't copy paste.
You could look at the XML file, I suppose.
Right. I think we should be able to.
It has the data in it. It just would be a lot harder to read.
Let's reconvert that real quick. So while I'm doing that in the background, if I've got a little bit more information on the level 2s, like I said, it is going a little bit more in depth. So it's the fence in depth is intended for the environment. So getting started with the level 1s makes a lot more sense for everybody to get started. And let's generate this output so I'm not completely messing things up here. So the output is going to be OpenSCAP 2.
Should be the same command as before, just got to paste in the new input and output files, right?
Yep, absolutely. And I should put this at the top again. And this is what you get for not having it copy pastable. Good job.
Yeah, well, you're on into the terminal. There's always something unexpected that happens, right?
There we go. So report file number 2. Report file number 2. Come on. Dupe. And that's what we've got inside of our notes, just to verify here. And Nate, I'll have you take over for a second on camera while I get this last set up and copy that to our notes.
Did we have any more questions that we need to talk about in the chat? I think we got them all covered. So what Josh is doing here is just basically taking the same command from earlier. Oh, here's a question. Can we create custom controls, for instance, for Tomcat or JBoss?
Can we create custom controls?
You can customize the existing rule sets. I don't know. I guess if you knew how to write OpenSCAP rule sets, you could make your own controls.
Right.
That's kind of a tough one, though.
Absolutely right.
So, and there, a lot of these take into consideration a number of different applications. So it could be that there's already rules in there that apply to Tomcat, if those are in the scope of the CIS, for example. I'd have to go look. I don't know if they're in there or not.
Right.
We got Billy Holmes in there giving us the clear commands, the ASCII escape sequences to clear the screen because he didn't know about Control-L.
Nice. Right. Again, always more than one way to do things in Linux.
Yeah.
All right, this is results. Results CIS file. Here we go. So this should be correct now. We've renamed it to where it's going to be OpenSCAP report file 2.html from the OpenSCAP results file CIS level 2. So let that generate. And then we don't need to reinstall links. We can just go through and open that file up here in just a second. Yep. Okay. And I'm just going to keep on doing what I know, which gotta love it. Links, we're going to go OpenSCAP. And that's going to be results HTML. That's going to be reports 2. All right. So finally got there. That's what I get for not copying and pasting everything.
Well, it happens.
So the level 2 CIS out of the box is going to be a 67.32% out of 100. So again, we've got lots of different things that we can go through and harden it to your organization to where this should not be a one size fits all.
Yeah.
You need to talk about risk for your environment. So one of the things that Nate and I were talking about before was maybe you're in an environment that you need to have your USB blocked. So if you're inside of let's say a gas station and the end terminal system that you go through and pay cash to be able to go pump gas, it's got USBs in the back that's available for somebody to walk up and plug in a USB. You should probably be blocking it there versus if you're a bank behind a teller system in a window, maybe that's not so much of a threat. That's going to differ per environment why you would go through and turn those on or off, right?
And there's a tool in RHEL called USB Guard that'll help you do that. I haven't used it
Absolutely.
myself. Maybe I should brush up on that because it sounds like a pretty useful tool. I know, like in the old days, they used to fill USB ports with epoxy to keep people from doing that. Remember that?
Oh, it hurts. It still hurts me to see that. I remember they had locking ones too, to where you could put a device inside and lock it to where it wasn't permanently destructive, and then you could put in
Yeah.
a special key to pull it back out. Right?
That's probably better than filling it with epoxy.
It's a little bit less damage, that's for sure.
Great solution, but a little permanent.
Absolutely, right? So if we want to go through and step back now into remediating that CIS level 1, we can go through and do that if we're ready.
Yeah, so there's been some chat about customization on rule sets and whatnot, and the topic of SCAP Workbench has been brought up. There is a tool that's currently in RHEL called SCAP Workbench, which you can use to view and modify these policies. However, that is deprecated. So it's not gone yet, but it will be gone. I don't know what version of RHEL it's going to go away, and it could be gone in 10. It might not be. I don't know if anybody in chat has more info about that. I know we got a number of Red Hatters that might be closer to the situation, but just keep that in mind. Today you could use it, but it could be gone soon.
Absolutely, right? One of the other things that's awesome about OpenSCAP is that you can remediate via bash scripts or via Ansible. So while SCAP Workbench may be going away, if you've got Ansible Tower or something the like, you're able to go through and run these and still have that GUI thinking. So it looks like Scott's got a response on SCAP Workbenches not in CentOS Stream 10. So you take from that what you will.
Pretty indicative, right?
Absolutely, right?
So we looked at the report. We saw that CIS1 and CIS2 had different scores because, of course, we're scoring the same system with a more stringent rule set, right? So that was just a good example to show, yes, in fact, CIS1 and 2 are different. And yes, you can scan for either of them. So now the moment I think everybody's been waiting for is, okay, great. I have a report. What do I do with it? And I think you've got queued up the command right there. We're going to apply, what is that, CIS1?
It is CIS level 1. So this is the standard that everybody, quote unquote, should be running according to CIS, as where level 2 is the more hardened. So the cool part is, let's go ahead and hit enter on this. It's not going to take that long for it to go through and run.
Right.
It'll go through and tell you what passed, what failed. And then the new thing that you're going to see on screen is it's going to say fixed or fixing when it comes to certain items here that weren't enforced before.
Right. And again, this is something that you could do with the Insights Compliance tool. Once you have a rule set defined and you've applied it and you got your report back, you can also remediate right from Insights. So you don't have to do it at a command line like this if you're an Insights user.
If you're an Insights user, and then I believe you also need to have RHC installed, which is the system role.
Yeah, you'd have to have remote execution or remote commands or whatever we call it set up so that you can actually remediate from Insights.
Absolutely. And Eric has a great point on Insights and Satellite are also great solutions. So we can actually see now on screen, it says starting remediation. So
right, here we go. Here's the fun part, all the yellow fixed.
Absolutely, right. So the first thing is that's installing AIDE, which is the ability to find out, here's like a snapshot of your system. Did anything change on this? AIDE is amazing when it comes to turning it on and turning up the logging level, because you can see if there's a new file created, modified, changed. It's amazing.
Yeah, AIDE, if I remember correctly, that'll do checksums, or am I thinking of fapolicyd? Maybe that's what I'm thinking of. One of them will do checksums that'll make sure that the package the executable that you're running matches the checksum that it got from RPM when it was installed or from DNF.
Correct. So it's the advanced intrusion detection environment is what AIDE stands for. Right. So it does that file integrity checking. So it's comparable. You'll have multiple algorithms that'll go through and check, like MD5, SHA-1, 256, etc. And then it'll report to say, hey, what has changed between last time you scanned and now? Or if you've set that up on like a cron job. Yeah.
There's a cool feature in RHEL 9 called remote attestation, which uses keylime, which leverages both AIDE and fapolicyd to let you do that checksum verification from a remote centrally managed system, right? Ooh, so it's really cool, again, for those endpoint systems that are out in the wild that maybe you can't easily get to verify, right? Keylime will, report back to a centralized server and say, hey, this system, it doesn't look like the day you installed it. Maybe you want to check into that. So
awesome.
Cool feature of RHEL 9.
Looking forward to playing more with that here in the future, because there's more and more that's getting integrated with keylime that I'm excited about.
Cool. So
we're at the tail end here, almost wrapping this up.
Let this run, and then we're going to do another scan, right? To see, hey, how do we score now?
Exactly. What we're going to go through and do is do another, what are our results now? And then we'll look at that report, and that pretty much wraps. I see something came in chat. Can you talk about using the image builder tool to create a gold image for security baseline? I think there is an episode on that, and I think we can go through and grab a link to that.
Or yeah, we have done episodes about image builder. I think we've done, and we have a bunch of content on the Red Hat Enterprise Linux YouTube channel, which you're all watching at the moment anyway, about image builder. Both, I think everything that's up there right now is about the Insights image builder tool.
Absolutely, right? So on screen, I'm just exporting the results real quick to a readable format. So we'll give it a second here. And if you guys have any other questions, throw it in the chat. Happy to answer because we're just about ready to wrap up. Hopefully you found this interesting and helpful. And if there's other different frameworks that you're looking for help on or examples from, would love to hear that so we could go through and help cover that in the future.
Yep, Image Builder is a fun tool. I've recently started using Image Builder to make the base images I use for my labs. So whenever I run a new system in my hypervisor down in the basement, it's based on an Image Builder system, an Image Builder based image, or Image Builder built image. Words are hard today, guys.
Okay.
And I've recently, since we've been talking more about OpenSCAP, not just for this episode, but in general, right? Image Builder has the ability to build those SCAP policies at image build time. I've been thinking about, maybe not for the lab machines, but for any of like the home services machines and whatnot that I'm running, maybe I want to start applying CIS or something to those so that
I like that idea.
They have a slightly better level of security out of the box.
Absolutely, right? So scrolling on down to after we've gone through and remediated for level 1, we're now at an 98.02%. A lot more than what we were.
So Josh, why isn't it 100? We just applied all the stuff.
We did. But like I said before, we have to be able to scope what things are in our risk environment. And maybe like there was one that did not go through and pass, like going through and setting a password for Grub.
Yeah.
You probably want to go through and customize that password for Grub instead of going through and just trusting the script to go do it for you.
Yeah, there's certain rules, and this gets more and more true as you get into the more hardened rule sets. There's certain rules that are difficult to automatically apply. Right. Maybe it could automatically apply them. But the example I always use is some of these rule sets require that, say, /temp is a separate file system.
Right.
How do you do that through automation without asking the administrator what space would you like me to use to allocate to temp? Right. It's hard to automate that. Now, at image build time, you can automate that.
Exactly.
But after a system's deployed, that could cause problems if it tried to do it automatically. So there are some exceptions here, right? If you're applying these rules to a system that already exists. And that's a whole other conversation we could have.
It's a deep dive.
If you're walking into a job as a security person or as a systems administrator and you've been asked to get your systems into compliance, blindly running OpenSCAP against all your production systems is probably a bad idea, right?
100%.
You're going to want to scan them. You're going to want to see what's acceptable. You're going to see what's reasonable to change. You're going to want to change those things and then maybe make standards for the next build, for example.
Absolutely.
That you can apply a more hardened rule set. So, these are conversations you're going to have with whoever asked you to harden the systems. Like, yeah, I could totally do that, but it's going to take this much downtime to make that happen. And then they have to accept that, right? So all conversations that you're going to have.
To Billy's point, he's saying that Ansible can't fix everything. Some policy-based, some are process, some people. You're absolutely right. My notes were procedures, policies, and risk management are all part of this conversation that you have to have from the start. Just running the CIS benchmark doesn't make you secure. It's going through and giving you a step in the right direction, but you have to have that conversation with your security organization.
All right. So I think we're done with the demos at this point, right?
We're all set. Yep, absolutely.
Cool. So there's that output. Awesome. All right. So this has been a fun conversation. I know compliance isn't exactly an exciting topic for most people. Usually you hear that word or you hear security and you start to have nightmares about audits and all the work that's going to come out of this and that annoying guy from InfoSec who just won't be quiet about, the things that you just have to have on your servers that he doesn't want. But, it's important. It really is important. And
Absolutely.
I think every time we see, company XYZ on front page news because of breach foo, that should tell you how important security really is.
And
what do they call
understanding
those?
environment.
Resume generating events, right?
Yes, absolutely. That's 100% correct. And if you need to start with understanding what your environment looks like, so you don't have to go through and say we got to lock everything down immediately and as hard as we can. Start in steps. Start with understanding your organization. Start with just running a benchmark to one of the frameworks, and CIS is a great example of that. So then you can document, hey, at this point in time in my career and or with the organization, we are here. This next quarter, let's see if we can't bump it from like the 67% compliant to, if it's that easy to go to 98% and it didn't cause any major issues, that's a net win for you. Plan the next quarter to go even more. Fantastic. We got a couple questions.
Yep, I think we have a few questions to answer. So go ahead, shoot. All right. When performing remediation using OpenSCAP, does it have a negative impact on CPU and memory usage? Will it cause high CPU and memory usage?
So depending on your environment, if you've got a very beefy machine versus an edge device, it's going to differ, right? In some regards, like it was installing AIDE. It's installing a package, so it's the same amount that if you're going to go yum install, which could be a very little bit, but you need bandwidth then. So if you're in an offline or disconnected network, unless you're pointing to an internal repository, your mileage may vary. So is it going to make it a detriment on everything? No, but there's a small overhead that's going to take to be able to go run this.
Yeah, I think this is one of those cases where it's really fair to say it really depends. Depends on what rule set you're applying. It depends on the system you're running it on. Some of those tasks are going to be higher intensity than others. So yes and no. It's hard to say. Hard to say for certain. All right. Do we have any more questions? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
It's not going to bring the system down to its knees. It was what I would say. There's a slight overhead to it.
Okay. Example, enabling FIPS after install is also non-compliance, right?
So that's a fantastic question. When you go into FIPS, this is a whole nother level. We can deep dive more of that on our next episode or when we do the stigging as well, because FIPS compliance stig will go. Once you go FIPS, you can't go back. You're talking about a reinstall. So you've got to go through it. If you're going through that level of effort anyway, it helps to be able to go through and enable that from the start. And typically, whether that's image builder or doing that from install time. So it makes it easier. It's not perfect. So if you can do it, if you really want to enjoy pain or into that, that's cool. Go for it. You could do a lot of things.
I love stress and anguish. Let's do that.
Right. Just because you can.
All right. Did we have any more questions?
Some checks manual. Absolutely. Some checks are manual. And like I said before, some of these are procedures or policy based and not based off of the just going and running Ansible or bash scripts to be able to go through and close this out.
Yeah. OpenSCAP can't, institute your InfoSec security program that maybe is part of compliance, right?
Right.
But it can, change the password policy on the box, right? So there's certain things that it can't do for you. And I don't know that the OpenSCAP policies even contain rules for stuff that cannot be implemented on a system, right? So if you're following something like dissastig and there's things in there that are all about process, right? Or policy, those are harder to automatically deploy. So yes, you can't just run OpenSCAP and be like, we're done.
Absolutely, right. It is one step in the process. And to David's comment saying more examples might be helpful, like creating before and after reports on compliance with the STIG. That's fantastic information. We'll go through and cover that in the future.
Yep. So I thought we would start with kind of some basics because this is the critical path after all, right? Before we had tools like Image Builder, which we are going to talk about today, there was another way to get this done. And a lot of people probably still live in this world. So first thing we're going to try is a tool called virt-sysprep. Okay, so imagine you've done an install of RHEL, like in a virtual machine. You then connected to that machine and made a bunch of changes to harden it. Maybe you used OpenSCAP, maybe you did things manually, maybe you added accounts, maybe whatever it is that your policies dictate. And then you want to use that as a VM template, or maybe you want to upload it to your cloud provider later, something like that, right? There's this tool called virt-sysprep. It comes from the guestfs packages, right, which you can install on RHEL. It's usually installed along with libvirt if you're installing it and running things locally. And that's what I'm going to use today to take a base image that I've already got. I actually built a machine last week when we were talking about Kickstart, so I could show you what a Kickstart file looked like. Remember that? And I'm going to use that VM to build a sysprepped disk image. So, wow, typing is also hard. So I'm going to go to var-lib libvirt images, right? That's where I keep all my disk images for all of my virtual machines. And there's a virtual machine called KS. Oh, it's -- all, not -a. I'm used to Podman here. Called KS base. That's the machine I built last week manually, right? Now, virt-sysprep will let you target either a VM, preferably one that's shut off. You can sysprep a VM that's like defined in libvirt, or you can take that VM's disk image, right? Which is exactly what I'm going to do here. So the machine's already shut off. I'm going to make a copy of its disk image. So ksbase.qcow2, that's the machine, that's the disk image for that particular machine. And I'm going to copy it to something that's a little more generic. Golden dash, I don't know, we'll say Q1 2025, because let's make this look realistic, right? And now I just basically made a copy of that thing's disk image. And now virt-sysprep works actually pretty simply. You do virt-sysprep, and then if you were targeting a virtual machine, there's a different command line option to do this, but I'm going to target the disk. You do -a, which sounds weird. Equate that to add, right? -a, add this disk image, and then the disk image, right? And what this is going to do when I hit enter is it's going to go through a bunch of modules that basically are built into virt-sysprep that clean out things within this disk image that are identifiable to this machine. So things like udev rules, things like SSH host keys, right? So this one right here, you see that on the screen there. It's cleaning out the host keys that were generated when this thing booted the first time, the password backups, PAM data, network information, host names, all the things that are specific to this machine are now getting cleaned out of this disk image. And then what I can do is I can take that disk image now that it's done, and I can spin up a new virtual machine from it, and it'll come up as though I just finished the installation, and it'll regenerate all of those customizations or all those things that are specific to the machine on the first boot. So for example, I talked about SSH host keys. Those, of course, are unique per machine, right? And when you boot up the first time, when the SSH daemon starts up, it'll generate new keys. So what this basically did is it deleted those keys. I used to do this manually back in the old days. So I would delete things like the udev rules, and I would delete the SSH host keys, and there's subscription manager registration data that I would clean out. This goes deeper, and it cleans out stuff that I never thought to remove, right? So pretty good stuff. And that's pretty much the demo. I could spin this up in a VM if somebody wanted to see that, but just, keep in mind, this is kind of how the tool works.
People who come from a virtualization background, they're used to sealing their templates.
Yep.
Right. And that's what this tool is doing. Is it's
right.
Making it so that we can make duplicates without having artifacts left over.
Right. So yeah, the idea would be that I can spin up a new machine from this disk image. Or if I did it on the machine that was there, I could clone that virtual machine. And by cloning it, I then have a copy of the way that machine was configured. But all of the data that identifies that machine is wiped out. So that all gets regenerated because this is a new machine, because we don't want those things to conflict when the machine comes up.
Right. So stay with us, everyone, as we transition to the longer block of content in the show, where we're going to be going through and generating some of these disk images using various and sundry image building technologies that come with Red Hat, or RHEL. And what else, Nate?
Yeah, so we've got some demos for 2 different ways you might run Image Builder, and we can build in that compliance and security hardening right there from the get-go.
Yep. So don't forget to mash that like and subscribe button so that you can get more content when we're making new stuff. And we
Yeah.
will see you in just a moment. Whew. Transition. So today we're going to be talking about building images. And so, Nate, why would you want to build compliance into your disk image?
Well, really what it comes down to is when you're deploying new machines, whether that's in the cloud or physical machines or in your virtual data center, your virtual infrastructure, the more time you can save, the more repeatable the compliance is, right? Then the easier it is to get it done and the easier it is to not miss things on that checklist, right? So if you're doing it like the old way, you'd pop in installation media, build a machine, and then you'd have to remember or have a checklist of all the changes you want to make. Things have matured, right? Things are better now. You can do things automatically with OpenSCAP, but why not just do that once and put it into the disk image so that next time you build a machine, it's already done, right? And that's basically what we're talking about today.
Yeah. And specifically, compliance standards aren't just installation choices. There's also user management controls, software stuff, policy things like how frequently you apply updates and what updates you apply. There's like a lot of other things, right? It's not just choices that we make it install. But the choices that we make it install are often really hard to undo. A great example is file system layout.
Yeah.
Like you have to have a specific file system layout for your compliance standard. Going back on a running machine and trying to put that into place is very challenging. So if we can do some of this stuff at install time so that we're in a good shape to then handle all the operational components of our compliance standard. So Nate, shall we build a box?
Yeah, I think we should build a box. We have 2 different versions of Image Builder we're going to show. I think, Scott, you're going next with Insights Image Builder, which we have shown before on this show, but we haven't shown the features where, we can apply compliance. But yeah, Scott, go ahead. Let's have fun looking at Insights Image Builder.
Right on. So if you've not seen Image Builder before, it's a Red Hat tool that allows you to make a disk image that you can output to different formats. So you generate what's called a blueprint, and then you can build that same blueprint, but output it as a VMware OVA file, or a Amazon AMI, or a Azure virtual hard disk. And so it's the same build instructions, just the how it comes out the other side is different.
Yeah.
Historically, when we've talked about it, it's been about this like multi-deployment thing where you can know that your system is built in the same way with the same software, with the same file system layout, with the same first boot scripting executed on it. But you can do that locally or in the cloud or on your VM infrastructure. And so all of that is still true, but now we're going to be adding the additional wrinkle of compliance standard. All right, so I went ahead and logged in to the console.redhat.com site, and you can see the very first tile there is Insights for RHEL. So I'm going to go ahead and select that one. And this brings up all the normal insights things you may have seen in the past, like how many CVEs are outstanding in my fleet and other stuff. But today, what we're interested in, images. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to create a new blueprint. And it has this little wizard so that we can answer these questions to then create a built system. So one of the things I like about Image Builder, Insights Image Builder, or Online Image Builder, is that I can choose my release, right? So notice that I can support RHEL 9, RHEL 8, or RHEL 10 beta. And then based off of my selection, there may be some other customizations that happen. But on RHEL Image Builder, which Nate is going to show us in a bit, the version of the operating system on which you are building images is the version of the images that are built. So if you're using a RHEL 9 host, you make RHEL 9 images. And if you want to make RHEL 8 images, you need a RHEL 8 host.
Yeah.
So Insights Image Builder adds this like additional flexibility. So I'm going to make a
And the
run
fact
log.
that you don't have to host any infrastructure is also nice, especially for cloud users, right? If you live 100% in the cloud, why would you want to run infrastructure to run Image Builder when you can just use ours?
Exactly. The other customization that Image Builder has is Insights Image Builder. Man, Insights Image Builder has is the
Friday, Scott. Week's almost over.
If I can only. So just like we were talking about with the operating system version for on-premise Image Builder, the same thing is true for architecture. So if you're building images on an x86-64 box, then the images you're making are x86-64 images. But with
Right.
OnSite's Image Builder, we can actually choose to build the image on a different system behind the scenes, invisible to you, which means we can offer you options for what architecture the image is built for. So currently we support x86-64, which is pretty standard, or ARCH64, which is ARM architecture.
Right.
So I'm going to choose x86-64. And then as I scroll down, I tell it the output format I want it to be in. So notice all the cloud providers are there. And if you choose a cloud provider, some additional questions will open up on things like where are we going to put the image if you want to upload it directly to your cloud provider. It'll also determine things like the output format. So AMI versus QCOW2 versus VHD. Or you can choose VMware. Or you can choose a local QCOW2. So for example, if I was giving this image to Nate, I might make it as a QCOW2 so he could import it into his locally running hypervisor there in his home lab. Or bare metal installer, it's actually an ISO that when I boot the machine off of it, it will perform an install. So a little bit different there. All right. So
what I like about those cloud provider integrations is that, and you mentioned this, but very briefly, that it'll push it to your cloud provider, right? So if I picked AWS or Google Cloud or Azure, and I've got credentials configured within Insights, then it'll actually take that resulting image and push it right over to the cloud provider. It'll show up in my custom images, which is really handy. You can even launch a VM from it right from the console here, which is kind of cool. I shouldn't say VM, instance. Instance is the right word in the cloud, even though we all know it's a VM.
All right, so to keep things simple, I'm just going to use a VMware image.
Okay.
And then the next step is, would I like the machine to automatically register with Red Hat? And if so, what activation key should I use for performing that registration? So I'm not going to get into activation keys and stuff. We actually have a short video that Matthew made about making activation keys. So if you're interested, you can look over in our shorts content and see one that's been generated. And then down towards the bottom is any additional repositories that should be included. All right. So here's the zhuzh. This is what we've been waiting for, the OpenSCAP profile. So what security standard is this system going to comply with? And so when you pop up this pull down, there's a big list. So we have ANSI, which is the French security standard that their government issues, CCN, which is another one issued for government use cases. If you're unfamiliar with all of these or which ones are important or not important, a great one to start off with is the CIS benchmark. The CIS benchmark is just kind of like a general industry standard for security compliance. And there are actually two levels. So level 1 is relatively minor, and level 2 is more stringent on what has to be the case for the machine to be considered compliant. And if I scroll down through the list, we'll see the Australian Essential 8, HIPAA, there's PCI DSS, DISASTIG, right? So there's a whole bunch that you can choose from. But I'm going to choose Sys benchmark for workstation.
And these are the same base rule sets that you can access through compliance within Insights too. So if you're leveraging compliance, you can also find those same rule sets over there. I don't think this will do custom rules yet though, Insights Image Builder. I'd have to look into that. I don't think it does.
So one of the important things to notice here is the disabled services. So it says if these are on the machine, they will be turned off by default. And that's part of the requirements of CIS level 1 benchmark security compliance. Similarly, we have the enabled services that will also be there. And I'm just going to hit next. And what I want to show you is that the other component is the file system layout, right?
And who changed your file system layout, Scott? How did that happen?
It was auto magic because I chose CIS benchmark level 1. CIS benchmark level 1 says you have to have a separate temp file system. And so I went ahead and created it in my file system layout. Now, one note, notice the disk sizes are very small.
Yeah.
So you want to like adjust things that are coming out, right? This is just like, I don't know how you're going to be using the machine. So Red Hat just makes guess. And hopefully like cloud instances are usually small. So we usually guess small. So you
can still add additional partitions here if you need to. You can still change the sizes. You know, you can still configure this. It's just that if you delete that temp, you will no longer be in compliance with the thing you asked it to be in compliance with.
Right. And then I did want to also show this. If I go back and I change my compliance standard, let's say I do CIS level 2 for server. So one, we get some additional kernel arguments thrown in there. So when I boot the machine, it will boot with these arguments. The disabled services got a little bit more severe, turns off things like Bluetooth. And when I hit next, CIS 2, has a whole bunch more file systems it needs as separate file systems. And the reason for this is that when a file system fills up, it will affect applications and users that utilize the disk space in that file system. But if you only have one file system, / and it fills up, then it affects the entire system.
Yeah, there's also mount options that some of these dictate that you need to apply, like home and temp, I think, with CIS level 2. Both need to be, no exec and no set UID?
Yeah, no SUID. That is correct.
Yeah.
And so that'll be taken care of as well here. But the reason that we have these separate file systems, so home, any user can create file contents in home, right? So if they do something silly and like make huge files, it can fill up the home file system. Temp, any user or process on the system can put things in temp. So if a process is awry, it can like fill up your temp directory and you wouldn't want it to crash the machine because you run out of disk space.
So I don't know if you can work this into your demo, but Shantanu asks, can you show what happens if you delete one of those required partitions? Does it slap you or does it just let you go ahead and do it?
Let's see. It lets you.
Yeah, I think that'll just, now you've willingly gone out of compliance.
Yeah. Now, hold on, let me see if I can put it back. No, it doesn't put it back. Oh, Shantanu. Now I have to add a new. Again.
I bet if you went back and changed the profile and switched it back, it would put it back for you, if that's easier.
We'll just do that. All right. Where was I? Oh. So yes, when you take it out, you're no longer in compliance with that standard. However, there might be a really good reason why you have to be out of compliance with the base standard.
Right.
And so all of these standards also have the ability to make exceptions. And so while you won't be in compliance with the base standard, you will have documentation that you'll be asked to make that says why you have chosen to do something differently than the standard. And maybe there's a really good reason for that. And as long as it's documented.
That's all about policy, right? Like that's not a technical control. That's you have gotten an exception. You've documented why the exception is. Maybe your InfoSec team has that filed somewhere, or you have to present it if they ask, that kind of thing, right? Like that has nothing to do with Image Builder.
Well, and the compliance scanners like OpenSCAP or the compliance utility provided here through Insights, you can actually adjust the scan to say, I don't need to comply with this element. And then your scan will simply skip that thing when it's calculating your compliance statistics or the errors that it produces of how you're out of compliance. This one won't count as a miscompliance.
Right.
All right. So var is for variable length content. You could have a lot, you could have a little, but things like email get stored here. Like if you're a mail server and you get a bunch of email, that could fill up the file system and crash your machine. That's not what we want. So we separate.
Log.
Yep. Same thing with logs. And then the one down lower, var temp, this is one that most people overlook. Var temp is also a world writable file system, just like /temp, that applications and users can put stuff in. And so that's why it's separated out, is because applications and users can use this disk space. And if it fills up, you don't want to have negative effects on your system.
And I think that other var log that's listed there is like var log audit or var log secure or something like that, which you probably want separate so that you're sure that it doesn't get truncated, right?
Correct. It is var log audit is what it is. All right. Cool. So this is actually a fairly new feature of Insights. So when I'm doing the install, what do you want me to install off of? Latest content means it's going to install off of all the latest RPMs available from the Red Hat CDN. Use a snapshot. We will have needed to set something up in advance. But what you can do is like basically make a fork of the RHEL repos based on a date. And then you can point your installs at that fork so that you know exactly what packages and versions are being handled because you made the fork at a certain time, and that's your content set. And until you make a new fork, that is a content set in stone. So you could use a snapshot, which is a forked content set given a specific time. I'm just going to use the latest because we're living on the edge.
Yeah, and those are usually for, I've got quarterly content that I've accepted as this is my base for this quarter. That's what I want to start things from. Maybe you then have exceptions that you have to install updates for that are CVEs or whatever, but yeah.
Yeah, but that can be done as part of the runtime of when new instances are forked off of this template.
Right.
Right. All right. This custom repositories, so we've added extra packages for Enterprise Linux into our build environment. So I can just check a box, and now I have access to all the extra packages for Enterprise Linux RPMs as well. But if you have your own additional packages, as long as you can get to them from Insights, you can add in these custom repos.
Very important for if you want Moonbuggy or Cowsay.
Exactly. But really, extra packages for Enterprise Linux gives you lots of different things. A ton of different Python libraries. Yeah, there's over 20,000 packages currently. We actually talked with Carl George earlier in the week on Matt's RHEL 10 beta series, and he was telling us some about how EPEL is built and how much is going into it. And the fact that there's already an EPEL 10, by the way, for 10 beta. So you can install these extra packages if you want, or you can leave it unselected, and then they're not going to be eligible for your package selection.
I feel bad. I haven't watched any of those yet. I'm going to have to go back and watch them. RHEL 10, guys, it's coming. Good stuff.
You're missing out. All right. So we're getting down to the end, right? You can see on the left-hand side, there was like a nav element that was telling me how far I was getting in my different choices.
Yep.
So additional packages. So beyond just like the minimum packages, what more stuff do you want? So maybe I want Nginx. There we go. And maybe I want Node.js. There we go. All right, and maybe I want a database, right? Because this machine is also going to do some web application server stuff. All right, and then down a little bit further, a couple months ago, we added
this, by the way. This is a great addition.
We added in recommended packages. It's part of our Lightspeed series of AI augmentation of products to make them easier to use or more helpful. So based off of what I've selected in my packages, these are packages that other people building images often select as well. So you can just click the add package button and it would go into your image, or you can choose to ignore it like I'm going to do, and it won't go into your image. All right, this last bit is also fairly new. So you can actually either drag and drop a bash script, or you can write it by just clicking, start from scratch, which will bring up an editor and you can just start typing. So this is a first boot script. So you've made the image and now you're deploying an instance or a VM off of the template of this image. These are the scripts that will automatically execute at boot time. So historically, we've relied on things like cloud-init to have it run things when it's initializing. And this is another way that you can do that without using some of the things that come with cloud-init. So you can just
you'll notice it didn't ask you to do anything like add a user. right? Or even set the root password. So the first time you boot up this image, you have to do something to add in a user. And previously that was cloud-init. You'd have to use cloud-init to do something like set up a cloud user, for example, or maybe add an automation user, add your first user account, something that you can get into this machine with. Now you can do it through this as well if you wanted to. And it even gives you a warning about sensitive data. So be careful how you define a user. If you're putting a user in here, make sure passwords are hashed, that kind of thing. Here you are again with the clear text passwords. We're going to start an argument. It says it right there. Don't include sensitive information, Scott.
There. All right. Next.
How'd you guess my password, by the way?
Because everyone knows that Nate loves dogs. All right. The last thing is just how we're going to keep track of it in the insights bits. So blueprint name, there you go. And then you can add a more detailed description. There you go. And next. And then it just gives me a chance to review all of my things. And this is something else I thought was really cool. So it used to be that you have to click the create blueprint button and then go over to the other thing and say, make this image. Now, if you use that little blue toggle pull down, there's an option to combine them. Create the blueprint and build an image. And so here's my image building for my web application server CIS level 2.
Yay.
So once this is done, I'll be able to download it. And there is a timer on your images that you make. So I think there's 6 hours, if I remember correctly, that you have to download the image with.
Right.
And then automatically removed if you after that time. But the blueprint will stay around. So if I missed the window or I need another one like this, I can go back in, find my web application server CIS level 2 blueprint and just build another one. Or make any changes to that blueprint I want and build another one.
Yeah, the other thing I really like though is if you click on those 3 dots next to the build, you can download a JSON request. And then you can, if you go look up the documentation on how to leverage the Insights API, you can pass that JSON request back to the Insights API through like a script or your Ansible automation or something, and it'll go and repeat this build process. So, say you're cooking up some automated build process that you do quarterly. You can just make it happen. You don't have to have some admin spend 20 minutes going through that web UI wizard again, or even have to go back there and click that button, right? You can just submit that and it'll go build a new one for you.
Well, and part of the JSON is also the output type. So you can also like kick off 3 builds of different types. So you get all your target deployment environments covered.
Right. So we're already at 12:30. Well, our time. We're already at half past. How's that? But we do have one more demo, and that is basically kind of the same thing, except using what we call RHEL Image Builder instead of Insights Image Builder. And I just realized that's kind of small. Let me make it bigger. That should be better. Okay, so I've already cooked up an image to test this out with, but I'm on a RHEL 9 system, 9.4, I think. I updated it before I installed everything. I have Cockpit enabled, obviously, right? So this is the web console. There's a plugin for web console called, I think, Cockpit-Composer. I have it in my notes here. I think that's what I called it. You have to have that plugin installed, and then the OS build compose packages that actually enables image builder on a RHEL machine. And then in order to do the compliance stuff, you also have to have the SCAP security guide installed. Just as if you were going to run OpenSCAP on this RHEL machine, you have to have that installed because it's going to reference that to do the compliance piece when you're building an image on RHEL Image Builder. And as Scott already noted, I am limited with this to, okay, I'm on RHEL 9.4, I'm going to build RHEL 9.4. I'm on x86-64, I'm going to build x86-64. So if I want other build environments, I need to have several machines running the versions of RHEL that I want to be able to build. So that's one of the drawbacks of RHEL Image Builder. One of the really nice things about RHEL Image Builder is, one, it gives you a couple more options during the build. right? Which I kind of like. However, there's a couple things that Insight's Image Builder does that RHEL Image Builder doesn't. They're not always in parity compliance. So maybe there's something you really want, a feature that is in one and not the other, that'll help you decide which one you want to use. But the other really awesome thing is, this is a machine I put where I want it, right? It could be in my secure data center. It could be on a cloud provider. It could be, running wherever it is that I want to run RHEL. So maybe that's really important to you. It also means that you can put more sensitive data in this if you wanted to, because you completely control it. It's not run by us. It's not, whatever. It's in a place you can secure. So just things to keep in mind. So I'm going to make a new blueprint, even though I've got one here already, just to show you kind of how the wizard works in RHEL Image Builder, because it is slightly different. Now, the first thing we got to do is give it a name. You're going to notice that already it looks different. There's no side menu here like Scott had in Insight's Image Builder, and you'll see why in just a second. So we're going to just call this, well, I clicked in the box, type in the box, ITT134, just because, really handy. And we're going to give it a description first. Notice Scott gave a description at the end. I'm giving it at the beginning.
And the reason for these differences is that I know everybody's like, oh, Red Hat, there's only one Red Hat and only one strategy and method of doing things because there's only one Red Hat. The reality is, like, we have a whole bunch of different engineering teams. And so there's an engineering team that manages this product and an engineering team that manages the Insights Image Builder. They're separate and they do talk, but sometimes they implement things differently, or somebody's like, oh, I want to pull this Jira, this feature request into my thing. And the other team didn't prioritize that feature request yet. So that's why there's some differences between the two.
Right. So it's asking me about packages already. Notice it didn't ask me what repositories to enable. That's because it reads the repositories from the host that I'm running it on, right? So another case where this is sharing, and why does it keep doing that? Must be because I made it bigger. Let me make it smaller again. I think the UI is getting confused because of the zoom. Okay, so where was I? I was on packages, right? You can see the menu's back now, but the menu looks totally different. The customizations pane is different, right? Because there's a bunch of extra things in here that I can do that I couldn't do through Insight's Image Builder. So again, we can add a package. I'm just going to add the good old favorite HTTPD. Why does it keep doing that to me, Scott? This is not helping my demo. Search, get me the thing. There we go. All right. And you can actually add kernel arguments if you want to. Again, something that Insight's Image Builder didn't do, but this will. I can add in like legitimate, just type in kernel arguments or the kernel that I'd like it to run, right? So another place where we can add some extra. Why is it doing that? It's like the page is refreshing or something on me and going back. Okay, so I can use automatic partitioning or manually configure partitions. Now, the difference here is with RHEL Image Builder, when I later define the OpenSCAP policy that I want it to use, it does not automatically put the partitions in place. So I have to know what I need to put in here. And this is where I would do it, right? So not helping me here. So you're going to have to beforehand know what the policy requires, right? And that's just the way RHEL Image Builder works versus the way Insight's Image Builder works. I'm going to leave it at automatic for now, just because I feel like if I start delving into that UI, it's going to refresh on me and kill me. I can enable or disable services selectively. I can just tell it, like, I want to make sure, I don't know, cups is turned off. And I can say that's disabled in here. There we go again with the thing. Firewall, I can define ports and services. So we're going to enable HTTP, right, as an enabled service. I can also say services I want to explicitly block. I can add zones to the firewall, which is something we talked about when we talked about firewall-cmd in a previous episode. Users, again, there's a whole separate call out here for users. I can just go like add user, and then the thing refreshes on me again, and I can't actually do the thing. So I can add in a user with their password and their SSH key. I can type the password here in plain text and it'll hash it to put it into the script, right? So I don't have to worry about whether it's saving that securely or not. So I'm going to go Nate and I don't know, test. There's an awesome password right there. We can give it an SSH key. We can make that user a server administrator. And then it does the thing again. It's really killing my demo, Scott. It's like, all right, we can add additional groups. right? Which you might think, well, why didn't it add groups before users? Because then I could go back and say, I also want this user in a group, but whatever, this is the order that it's in. If I add a group, I can then add the user that I just created to that group, right? SSH keys, this would be additional SSH keys. So if there's like system users I want to add SSH keys to, that kind of stuff, you can do that through here. Again, you might say, well, why are these separate? Because there's use cases where there might be a user that already exists that you're trying to add an SSH key. Sorry, I'm rushing here with the UI being weird. I want to get through these things. Like I said, I've already got a template done that we'll go and look at when I'm finished with this. Time zone and NTP servers, again, right? Extra things that you might care about. Locale, right? Languages you want installed. You can set the host name, right? So if you're going to be, if you know what the host name of this machine is going to be when you go to deploy it, you can set that to begin with, right? Or maybe you don't want to because this is going to be a golden image that you then redeploy several times. Let's see, FIDO device stuff, good stuff. And this is what I wanted to get to was OpenSCAP. Now, you'll notice this is different. I have to put in the data stream and the profile ID, okay? And there it goes again. This is going to kill me when I'm trying to put this in here. Let me see if I can just edit this image instead. This might be easier to show you what I'm trying to show you. Here, if I click on OpenSCAP. So this is the same thing it was asking me for in that wizard. You have to put in the data stream, which if you remember from our OpenSCAP episode, or OpenSCAP episodes, I should say, where JSCAR helped us out. When you run OpenSCAP, you have to tell it, where's the data stream? Where am I reading these profiles from? And that's on your local file system on your machine. That's what came from that SCAP security guide that I said we had to have installed before we got started here. User share, XML, SCAP, SSG, content, blah, blah, blah. There's an XML file in there you have to point to. And obviously, if you've got a custom data stream, you can put that in here. It doesn't have to be the one that's included with the SCAP security guide if you have your own custom rule sets. And then you have to tell it what profile. And again, the profile, like, how would you know to type this in here? XCCF, org, SSG, project, content, blah, 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 blah. Well, if you use the OpenSCAP tool on the command line, you can tell it to list profiles. Again, we covered that in our previous episode about OpenSCAP. So you just literally copy it from there, paste it in here, and then it'll know what profile it's supposed to use. So that would have been, you know, in that wizard that we just had to cancel out of. And then once you get through all of those things, and this is actually handy because if you need to go back and make changes to that blueprint, this is the UI that you're presented with to get that done, right? So like I did before with that automatic partitioning, if I changed my mind, or if after I was done, I decided I really need to go figure out what partitions that policy needed me to set, and I've got that all documented, I can come in here and make those changes. So once you finish the wizard, you're not locked into the choices that you made. And same deal with Insights Image Builder. You can go back and make those changes afterward. All right, and then I would just click Create Image. And what this will do is it'll add a build to my queue. Now, once I find this UI a lot easier to work with, but you can get through the command line a TOML file, which has all of these choices in it, right? And then you can say, save that, export it to a different machine. Again, if you have several different versions of RHEL you're trying to build, maybe you take that TOML file, put it on a RHEL 8 machine. There may be changes you'd have to make based on package names and compatibility and whatever, but it might give you a good starting point. But you can kick off builds from the command line as well, which I think is really handy. So you can just go to the command line and say, all right, it's Q2, I need to build a new image, go build, right? And then it goes and does its thing. So just keep that in mind. So we're going to do the create image. No, wait, that's not what I wanted to do. I don't want to make a new one. I want to build this image. Right. So if I go back to blueprints and here click create image, that's bad naming, Scott. I'm going to file a bug. Create image should not be the same name as the build image. So no, that is doing the same thing. Oh no, this is, sorry, I'm off today. This is asking me what output I want. And you see there's a whole bunch in here, and there it goes again with that refresh crap. Similar to what we saw on Insights Image Builder, but you'll notice there's a bunch of other things here like RHEL for Edge. I don't think we had that option in Insights Image Builder. Google Cloud, we had that, you know, whatever. We're going to do the QCOW too. We're just going to hit next quick before it refreshes and then create, because I want to show you what this looks like. If I go over, so you see here, it tells me that it's creating. If I go to images, now you're going to see there's a new image build in queue. Now this is of course, running locally on that machine that I'm using to run Image Builder on. And then I can, once it's done, I export that image in this very similar fashion to how you would do it with Insights Image Builder. You just click on the thing there, it'll let you download the image. So I do have a pre-made image, but we're already pretty over. I was going to show you how you would then run this in a home lab like I've got, but it's basically you take that disk image and you build a new VM and import that disk, right? And up it comes. But that's pretty specific to my home lab. Your mileage may vary. So did we have any questions? I'm sorry about the wizard refreshing on me and I wasn't able to show it as well as I wanted to.
Well, and I put in the chat that I suspect it's like when you're using the latest browser, you also want to use the latest cockpit. Because sometimes changes to Chrome or whatever will change how the page renders.
I went through this the other day and it worked perfectly. So I don't know why it's given me trouble now. I mean, literally 2 days ago when I built this machine, it worked fine. I blame the screen share. I think it's the screen share's fault.
That could also be. So William Green asked, can you set up LVM partitioning to match something like STIG requirements that SCAP would expect?
Does Image Builder support LVM?
So Insights Image Builder uses LVM by default. So when we were looking at the list of file systems it was creating them on LVM managed layout.
Yeah, I think this does as well, because it doesn't let you specify whether it's LVM or not. I would have to boot up my machine and look, but I think it does use LVM. I mean, that's basically the accepted standard for when you install RHEL, so I don't know why it wouldn't use LVM.
Well, there was a lot of weirdness around cloud where like for cloud imaging.
Yeah.
So for Insights Image Builder, the answer is yes. In fact, it even says in the partition stuff that it is using LVM and then just making your file systems as logical volumes on top of it.
Yeah, it doesn't say anything about it.
Shantanu asked if there were any limitations on how many images or how frequently we build images or anything like that with Insights Image Builder, even if one only had a developer for individuals account. And as far as I know, no. But also,
the limitation is how long they're stored.
Well, that's for sure. So once they're built, they only exist for a few hours.
Right.
But I've also not tried to build like 87,000 images at one time. So I don't know if there are some other safeguards put into place for performing that work. But for developer for individuals, you have 16 system entitlements. So, I mean, how many images do you need to build for 16 system entitlements at one time?
All of them, obviously.
Yeah, clearly. All right. But I think that runs us off the end of questions.
Cool. So yeah, I'm actually curious now. I'm going to stand up a VM using that image and see if it's LVM because I think it should be. But you're right. I don't know for certain.